Administrator of the U.S. Department of Energy Information Administration. He has worked extensively on electricity policy issues and economy-wide energy modeling for 25 years. He is a friend of this committee's, a source of information on an ongoing basis. We welcome you back, Doctor. If you could move that microphone in, and we would appreciate it. And whenever you're ready, please begin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss the Energy Information Administration's analysis of the Renewable Electricity Standard, or RES, program in Title I.
Can I just interrupt you for 1 second? Because it's like being in Yankee Stadium.
Is that right? You want me to speak up?
No. It's like being in Yankee Stadium and all of a sudden, in walks Lou Gehrig or in walks Mickey Mantle and in walks Bobby Garcia, the former great congressman from the state of New York. So it's so great to see. When
I grew up in New York also.
Yeah. So it's like being in Cooperstown. So when one of the all-time greats walks in. So we'll start all over again, Dr. Grunsbeck. Okay.
All right. Well, I'm Mr. Chairman. Thank you again. I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss the Energy Information Administration's analysis of the Renewable Electricity Standard, or RES, program in Title I of the American Clean Energy and Security Act discussion draft. EIA is the independent statistical and analytical agency within the Department of Energy that produces objective, timely, and relevant data projections and analyses to assist policymakers, help markets function efficiently, and inform the public. We do not promote, formulate, or take positions on policy issues, and our views should not be construed as representing those of the Department of Energy or the administration. Since I appeared before the committee 2 months ago, EIA has updated its annual Energy Outlook reference case to reflect enactment of the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, or ARRA, which provides significant new federal funding, loan guarantees, and tax credits to stimulate investments in renewable energy. The potential impact of the ARRA provisions on the projected use of renewable generation is large enough that an analysis of the RES that did not include ARRA in the reference case could provide misleading results, and we do include it in this analysis here that I will discuss. The RES proposal sets a target of 25% of covered sales of electricity in 2025 and beyond be provided by eligible renewable energy. However, because of exemptions provided to small sellers and to sales of electricity from certain generation sources, and the possibility that credits for qualified state energy efficiency programs could be used to meet a portion of the RES requirement, the amount of eligible renewables as a share of total electricity sales required to comply with the RES would be lower than the nominal target. EIA modeled 2 RES policy cases for this analysis. One case assumes that the maximum level of efficiency credits, up to 1/5 of the RES target in any given year, are claimed, while the other case that assumes that states cannot qualify for or elect not to use efficiency credits. Turning now to some of the main results from our analysis, power sellers will turn to a mix of renewable fuels to comply with the RES. In absolute terms, the key fuels are projected to be biomass and wind, but other renewable fuels, including solar and geothermal, are also projected to grow significantly in percentage terms. The higher renewable generation stimulated by the RES leads to lower coal and natural gas generation. The increased use of renewables stimulated by the RES also leads to lower electricity sector carbon dioxide emissions. Electricity sector carbon dioxide emissions in 2030 are between 7% and 12% below the reference case level in the 2 RES cases. Given the amount of eligible renewable generation projected in the reference case, the RES is not expected to affect national average electricity prices until 2020. As the required RES share increases to its maximum value in 2025, the value of the RES credits increases and the impacts on national average electricity prices become evident. The projected peak effect on national average electricity prices is between 2.7% and 2.9% in our 2 RES cases. Because of regional difference in electricity market structure, state RES requirements, and the different availability of resources in different areas, price impacts may vary by region, as shown in my written testimony. The quantitative results I've just discussed reflect the modeling analysis of the RES provisions on a standalone basis. We recognize that the RES could have significant interactions with other programs in the Chairman's discussion draft. For example, in previous analyses, EIA has generally found that a cap-and-trade program for greenhouse gases leads to significant growth in the use of renewable energy for electricity generation, which becomes more attractive when the cost of using fossil fuels goes up. To the extent that the proposed cap-and-trade program induces more renewable resources than required by a concurrent RES proposal, one might expect RES compliance costs to be reflected in the value of carbon dioxide allowances. Therefore, adding our standalone estimates of the costs of an RES to a standalone estimate of a cap-and-trade program cost would overstate the projected combined costs of implementing the two programs concurrently. In contrast, an energy efficiency resource standard, which can reduce or eliminate projected growth in electricity load and therefore the need for additional generation capacity, makes it more likely that a given RES target will require that generation from new eligible renewable capacity replace generation from existing capacity rather than from other types of new capacity. The cost penalty associated with backing out existing capacity, whose capital cost is already sunk, is typically much larger than the cost penalty associated with backing out alternative types of new capacity. Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, this concludes my testimony. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Grunsbeck, very much. Our next witness is Dan Riker. He is Director of Climate Change and Energy Initiatives at Google. He was previously co-founder of the New Energy Capital Corporation and served as Assistant Attorney General for Environmental Protection of Massachusetts. So we thank you for being here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. First, I want to applaud the subcommittee's work on this path-breaking and comprehensive bill. I'll make 3 points in my opening statement related to the Renewable Energy Standard, energy project finance, and energy information. First, Mr. Chairman, the Renewable Energy Standard in the bill is technically and economically achievable. Our nation has more than adequate renewable energy resources to meet the RES, and with continued technological advances and policy support, they become more cost-effective every day. And by implementing the RES in conjunction with the Energy Efficiency Resource Standard, we can dramatically cut the need to add additional generation. In my testimony, I highlight what may be the sleeping giant of renewable energy. Enhanced Geothermal Systems, or EGS, uses a common technique in the oil industry to fracture hot rock deep below the Earth's surface. Water is injected into the rock where it is heated to produce steam, then piped to the surface to generate electricity. A 2007 MIT study found that just 2% of the heat below the continental U.S. between 3 and 10 kilometers is equivalent to over 2,500 times total U.S. annual energy use. At Google, we've mapped the EGS resource state by state, and I'd like to submit the 50-state map for the record, Mr. Chairman. Our calculations show that just 2% of the EGS generation potential in South Carolina is almost 2/3 of current generating capacity. In Texas, it is double. In Arkansas, it is triple. In Maine, it is quadruple. In Oregon, it is 9 times. In Idaho, 32 times existing capacity. And, Mr. Chairman, only half jokingly, if the big dig in Boston had been vertical instead of horizontal, we might be powering a good chunk of Massachusetts using EGS. The beauty of EGS is that it provides baseload generation 24 hours a day. The U.S. once led in EGS technology, but leadership is now in Australia, where commercial projects are under construction, and Europe, where demonstration projects are at the megawatt scale are already operating. We have a chance to catch up thanks to $400 million for geothermal in the stimulus legislation. In addition to adopting an RES, the House should look at providing a credit multiplier for baseload technologies like EGS. The House should also authorize and appropriate significant federal support for EGS R&D beyond the stimulus. I'd also suggest, Mr. Chairman, an oversight hearing on this potentially transformational technology. Turning to my second point, the legislation we're considering does not directly address a critical issue in advancing our clean energy economy, increasing access to capital for the deployment of literally trillions of dollars worth of clean energy projects that will be essential to meeting our climate and energy goals, including an RES and EERS. Last week, Senators Bingaman and Murkowski jointly released a discussion draft of a bill that would create the 21st Century Energy Technology Deployment Administration, or CETA. I know Congressman Inslee has also been advancing this concept, and Congress Van Hollen introduced a separate proposal. The mission of CETA would be to encourage wide-scale deployment of clean energy technologies, particularly those that are perceived as too risky by commercial lenders, but with high potential to address our environmental, economic, and security challenges. Moving a technology from small pilot project to full commercial scale plant is often the point at which many promising energy technologies die. We call it the valley of death. I urge the committee to consider incorporating the CETA approach into the legislation we are considering today in order to address this critical problem. My third and final point involves improving access to energy information. With the national RES and EERS, Congress should also ensure that electricity consumers, large and small, have a more accurate picture of their electricity usage as well as the source and mix of their power. Congress should work to ensure that utilities provide consumer access to energy information through smart meters and other devices in as near real time as possible. President Obama has talked about how the smart grid funding in the stimulus bill could support the installation of as many as 40 million smart meters. However, draft guidance issued by the DOE on the smart grid program may discourage large-scale smart meter deployments. Congress should push DOE to support large investments in smart meter deployments and ensure consumer access to data. Finally, I'd like to urge the subcommittee to work with the new administration to determine how the Energy Information Administration could play a much more vital role in providing consumers and businesses with critical energy information. For example, with a national RES and EERS, the federal government will need to collect data at an unprecedented level in order to ensure compliance. Congress should ensure that EIA has timely access to critical data to gauge progress on key clean energy programs. This will require an extension of EIA's role and an increase in its funding. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Riker, very much. Our next witness, Diane Grueneich, has been Commissioner of the California Public Utilities Commission since 2005. She is a nationally recognized expert in energy and environmental issues. And to be honest with you, the reason that I've asked her to come here today is that she's the only witness I've ever heard who knows how to make energy efficiency sound exciting. And so since I've heard her do it before, I thought I would give her another chance. So welcome back.
Well, thank you so much. I would love to be talking on energy efficiency. I've slipped it in a little bit, but I'm actually here today on transmission, renewables, and smart grid.
Transmission needs even more work to be
Well,
to sound
I'll start
exciting.
with my first promo.
Okay, please.
We're building transmission in California. We're building it to meet renewables. If California, with all of our environmental rules and all of our environmental activists can do it, everywhere in the country can do it. This is the Tehachapi Wind Project. It's under development, and when finished, it's going to bring 4,500 megawatts of wind into the transmission grid. So there we go, if that's exciting. But getting back, let me first of all thank you for having me today. I am speaking on my own behalf, but I also bring greetings from Mike Peavy, who is president of our commission. He has reviewed my testimony and wanted to make sure that I passed on that he personally feels very strongly about these remarks as well and agrees with them. Let's start with renewable energy. As Dan Riker just said, there really is no question that the United States is blessed with renewables. This is not a question that we don't have the resources. It's not a question that we don't have the technical capability. It's a question of political will to make it happen. That's the very good news. As of January of this year, 33 states had RPSs or renewable goals. 33 states. At the state level, what we are waiting for is the national renewable standard. It will make a dramatic difference in our ability if we can have, as a nation, all the states, all the utilities moving ahead. In California, we have a 20% renewable standard, but our governor has now signed an executive order to have our state get to 33% renewables by 2020, and our legislature is now considering the bills to codify it. If California can set our goals at 33%, again, the rest of the country really can get to the levels that we're talking about in this bill. There's some really smart, flexible items in the bill on renewables. One of the items that Dan talked about was the part that you can meet your renewable provision through energy efficiency. In a pure world, you probably wouldn't do that. You'd probably just say, go with renewables. But this is a bill, in my mind, that's really trying to make this workable. Every state can do energy efficiency. We need to make sure that that provision is sensible, that it's not just a loophole, but it lets the states that may be farther removed from renewables really come in and go after the renewable section. Another part that I think is very creative that we frankly hadn't thought of in California, but I've now talked with our legislators and suggested they think about it, is the provision that says that you can have a credit of 3 times the renewables if you do local distributed generation. That's a really smart thing to put in the bill, because what it does is that when you're building renewables out to the areas like the Tehachapi's, believe me, it takes years to plan and permit and finance and build those transmission lines. But when you can instead look to do renewables right in your neighborhood, I mean, you can put solar photovoltaics on the rooftops of Costco's and Walmart's. You can have people in the neighborhood start to say, we'll even make it in our own homes on our roofs. And when you give it a 3 times credit, in my mind, we can have some states who have never even had renewables before start to become the leaders. And I hate to say put California and Texas to shame, but that's what we may start happening by some of these very creative provisions in the bill. Let me turn to transmission planning quickly. The interesting thing about the bill is the most important provisions on transmission planning are not in the transmission planning section. These are the provisions that make it a sensible way to do transmission planning. They're the energy efficiency provision, they're the renewable electric portfolio standard, they're the enhancement of the smart grid, they're the focus on distributed generation. All of those are the factors that let you reduce the need for transmission, because we don't build transmission just to have transmission lines. We build transmission because it carries electricity. And by having in this bill the fundamental building blocks that make you look at an entire system that will minimize how much transmission you need, you've got it right. This is, in many ways, the best way that I've seen looking at electricity in 30 years, because you've put in place those building blocks that say when you're doing transmission planning, you're actually doing it in the context of a very sensible approach. The other thing that I'll say about transmission is that it directs FERC to take into account all of these demand-side aspects when they have an expanded role in transmission planning. That is absolutely critical. If Congress is going to give FERC or any other agency at the federal level a larger role in transmission, and particularly in transmission planning, it's essential to have in there the provisions that they must look at the demand side. In fact, I think that the bill should go further and direct FERC in all of its decisions with regard to transmission, including approving transmission investment, that it does not discriminate against the demand side or against distributed generation. Let me just end with the smart grid, that I think that, again, it's got it right. The one part that I would add would be to have some provisions that provide increased technical assistance to the states. Smart grid is going to happen because there are thousands of decisions that government and the private sector is going to make. What you heard from Dan about increasing the information available, that's critical, but we're all going to need much better technical assistance, and that would help. The very last thing that I'll say is to thank you very much for letting me testify today.
Excellent. Thank you very, very much. Our next witness is James Robo. He is the President and Chief Operating Officer of Florida Power and Light, or FPL Group. Mr. Robo previously served as Vice President at that company. We thank you so much for testifying today.
Thank you, Chairman Markey, Ranking Member Upton, and members of the committee. I'm the President and Chief Operating Officer of FPL Group, North America's largest producer of renewable energy, and it's my pleasure to be here today to talk about the importance of enacting a renewable electricity standard this year. FPL Group is the nation's #1 producer of electricity from the wind and from the sun. Our wind fleet can power approximately 1.5 million homes and makes up a quarter of the entire U.S. wind energy market. Our solar power plants in California's Mojave Desert are the largest in the world. In Florida, we're building 110 megawatts of solar power, enough to vault the state into second place in the nation in solar production in the span of only 18 months. And just this week, FPL announced Energy Smart Miami, one of the country's largest implementations of smart grid technology to improve energy efficiency and reduce carbon emissions. We're proud that FPL Group has one of the lowest CO2 emissions rates of any electric power company in the nation. In fact, if every utility were as clean as FPL Group, CO2 emissions from the power sector would be reduced by nearly 50%. Total U.S. carbon emissions would be reduced by 20%, which is the equivalent of removing 209 million cars from the road, or roughly 80% of the nation's vehicles. Renewable energy holds tremendous potential for the United States. Each year, enough solar energy strikes a 90 by 90 mile patch of the Mojave Desert to meet the annual electricity needs of the entire country, and enough wind power sweeps across the Dakotas to meet more than half our electricity needs. We've barely begun to tap this nearly unlimited resource. To do so, it's vital that Congress enact a renewable electricity standard this year, and here's why. First, an RES will help create a clean energy economy. Many countries are betting that the world of the future will thirst for low-carbon energy in the way it thirsts for oil today. We can't afford to remain on the sidelines while the renewables industry and jobs that go along with it are created elsewhere. We're already falling behind even Europe in this regard. In fact, nearly every one of FPL Group's largest renewable energy competitors is from outside the United States. Second, an RES will give the renewable energy industry certainty and will give utility decision makers a sense of urgency. In the electric power sector, we make capital decisions with a 30-year time horizon. We can't spend billions of dollars to build a clean energy economy without confidence that demand for low-carbon power will remain strong. A federal RES with timelines extending to 2039 will send the clearest possible signal to investors that demand for renewables will continue. And the targets that utilities must meet along the way will provide the urgency needed for prompt action. The best incentive to ensure timely and proactive utility decision-making around renewables is a reasonable yet firm target. Third, a federal RES will drive down the cost of renewables. Make no mistake, in many markets today, renewables such as wind are competitively priced, despite the fact that they're disadvantaged versus fossil fuels due to the lack of a price on carbon. The cost of wind power has fallen by roughly 25% over the past decade, even as the average electric bill in the U.S. has risen by nearly 50%. By stimulating demand, an RES will continue to drive down the cost of renewables over time. Fourth, a federal RES will ensure that only the most cost-efficient renewables get built. The current patchwork of more than 30 different state regimes is cumbersome, costly, and creates incentives for bad decisions. For example, many states require utilities to buy only in-state renewable energy, even if it costs more than renewable energy purchased from elsewhere. That's like forcing grocery stores in Maine to buy oranges grown only in Maine. It makes no economic sense. And finally, an RES is essential to address the threat of climate change. That threat isn't just environmental, it's economic. Those who say the cost of addressing climate change is too high assume that doing nothing is free. On the contrary, unchecked climate change could cost the United States tens of billions of dollars over the next 2 decades. But no matter what your beliefs are about climate change, investing in renewable energy makes sense for America. It will replace finite fossil fuels with the infinite energy of the wind and the sun. It will result in cleaner air. It will conserve precious water. It will strengthen our energy security in a volatile world. And finally, it will keep us competitive in the race to build a clean energy economy. Mr. Chairman, thank you for the opportunity to testify this afternoon.
Thank you, sir, very much. Our next witness is Gregory Kunkel. He is the Vice President of Environmental Affairs at Tenaska. Mr. Kunkel directs environmental compliance, permitting, and water resources issues at that company. We welcome you, sir.
Chairman Markey, Ranking Member Upton, and happy birthday, by the way. And members of the subcommittee, for this opportunity to discuss Tenaska's 2 commercial-scale electric generation projects using carbon capture and storage technologies, Trailblazer in Texas and Taylorville in Illinois. My name is Dr. Greg Kunkel, and I'm Vice President of Environmental Affairs of Omaha-based Tenaska, one of the largest independent power producers in the United States. Tenaska currently employs nearly 700 people and has developed approximately 9,000 megawatts of natural gas-fired electric generating capacity across the United States. Our affiliates market natural gas, electric power, and biofuels, and also are involved in private equity fund and acquisition management focused on the energy space, including renewable energy, infrastructure development, natural gas pipelines and storage, and electric transmission. The Natural Resource Defense Council benchmarks Tenaska's power plants as having the lowest carbon footprint of any of our peers, less than half the national average emission rate of greenhouse gases. However, as clean as our fleet is, like a number of our peers in the independent power sector, our older long-term contracts did not explicitly anticipate the cost of carbon control. To ensure that these clean, efficient facilities can keep operating, we urge the committee to provide a mechanism for hold these contracted facilities harmless for the duration of their contracts. Now, with regard to carbon capture and storage, Tenaska's current initiatives, Trailblazer and Taylorville, may give the subcommittee some sense of the CCS projects that we believe can be built with today's proven technologies. When Tenaska embarked on developing these utility-scale CCS projects, natural gas prices were high and volatile, and there was a glut of gas generation. This encouraged us to consider coal for baseload power facilities. However, we recognized that new federal, regional, and state greenhouse gas emission controls were very likely during these plants' 50-year life. Of course, just last week, EPA issued its endangerment finding and is considering comprehensive rulemaking to regulate carbon emissions. And now Congress is taking up the issue in earnest. Tenaska's objective has been to find ways to develop the baseload resources required for the electricity market, but we weren't willing to invest in solid fuel projects without addressing the climate change issue. So a question before us was how to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the design of projects today. To that end, we needed to assure ourselves that carbon capture technologies were ready for a utility-scale project, a secure home was available for captured carbon dioxide, and the economics and long-term financing arrangements for such projects could work. On February 19, 2008, Tenaska announced the Trailblazer Energy Center, a 760 megawatt gross and 600 megawatt net output supercritical pulverized coal electric generation facility with the capability to capture 85 to 90% of its carbon dioxide. The site is near pipelines to the world's largest market for carbon dioxide, Permian Basin enhanced oil recovery. 2 railroads serve the site, and the electrical interconnection is also nearby. The comment period on Trailblazer's draft air permit closed on April 17th, and the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality will be working toward a final permit over the next months. We've received competitive proposals for the facility's design and construction, are working on detailed engineering studies to support the financial closing, and a construction start in 2010. Commercial operation could be as early as 2015. Through our work with leading EPC contractors and equipment manufacturers, Tenaska is increasingly confident that we can finance the project and negotiate suitable terms for the plant's construction. Local and state governments have provided tax incentives for building the plant and are encouraging oil producers to use the facility as CO2. We still need some form of federal incentive participation to make the project work, but that seems increasingly likely. Trailblazer's significance is that it will demonstrate post-combustion capture technology for existing power plants that today contribute 2 billion tons to the U.S. emission inventory and 10 billion tons to the worldwide emission inventory. By locating near a viable CO2 market, Trailblazer can pioneer this technology at a reduced cost. The Taylorville Energy Center is a hybrid integrated gasification combined cycle electric generation facility being developed by Christian County Generation, with Tenaska as the managing partner. The project will manufacture pipeline quality substitute natural gas, or methane, from Illinois bituminous coal. SNG will fuel the power block. The amount of SNG produced will significantly exceed our requirements, annually freeing up 10 billion cubic feet of SNG for eventual sale off-site. The facility will employ 1,500 construction workers and create hundreds of permanent jobs in the coal and power sectors. Taylorville will capture 50 to 60% of the carbon dioxide that would otherwise have been emitted, remove moisture and sulfur compounds, and compress the carbon dioxide stream for pipeline transport, either to nearby geologic sequestration wells or for use in EOR operations elsewhere. The power island will have criteria pollutant emissions equal to those of a combined cycle natural gas generation facility. No electric generation facility utilizing coal-derived fuel operating anywhere approaches the proposed emission performance of Taylorville.
If you could try to summarize, sir.
Yet the project relies exclusively on proven technologies for coal gasification, gas processing, and power generation. The one important thing for all these types of projects, and we think they're real projects that can come off in the near future and begin construction as early as next year, is providing some sort of regulatory framework and certainty for these projects. We've provided specific comments on aspects of the ACES draft in our testimony. And we look to those provisions, but there's a whole variety of ways that the bill could support these types of projects.
Thank you, Dr. And how much CO2 can you take out of the coal?
The Trailblazer project in Texas would take 90%.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Mr. Hawkins, Mr. David Hawkins, the director of the Climate Center at the Natural Resources Defense Council, one of the most frequent visitors to this committee in its history. He has been working on air pollution issues for over 30 years. We welcome you back. Whenever you are comfortable, please begin.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me to testify today. I'm going to focus today on a pathway for coal. NRDC, as an environmental organization, is a strong supporter of efficiency and renewable energy resources, but we also believe that it is important to have a pathway for advanced coal. It's important in order to get the policy support for the protection of the climate programs that we need, and it's important to actually make those climate protection programs happen more easily in the real world. We think we can get deep cuts in carbon dioxide emissions faster and at lower costs if coal with carbon capture is on the table as part of the toolbox, and that's why we very strongly support it. NRDC is a member of the U.S. Climate Action Partnership, and we put forward in that document what we believed was an integrated package of policy support for carbon capture and disposal. There were 4 things that we recommended. The first was a requirement for the government to get its act together in terms of developing the necessary permitting rules. The second was a program to do early government financial support so that we could get 5 gigawatts of coal capacity with carbon capture deployed by 2015. Sounds like Tenaska could be part of that 5 gigawatts. The third element would be a transitional program where the early movers in the carbon capture world would get a financial incentive. This is very important to overcome the competitive barriers to these kinds of technologies, even in the early years of a cap-and-trade program. And the fourth thing we recommended was a set of mandatory emission standards for new coal plants so that we would have clarity and an assurance that we didn't have to rely just on market forces, but we'd have that good old-fashioned regulation that says, here's a performance standard, you need to meet it. And by the way, there'll be financial incentives to help you do even better. The ACES discussion draft does a great job of embracing these concepts and articulating them, and while there are a few places where some added detail would be helpful, we think that it is a very great job, and we're very supportive of it. In our view, carbon capture and disposal is a real option. It can be made into a reality out in the world if it has adequate policy support. That policy support has been lacking, but it can be provided through the kind of provisions that are in the ACES draft, and for that reason we support it. Mr. Chairman, we've heard lots of concerns over the last couple of days about whether the technology is available or whether it is available at a reasonable cost. And there have been lots of concerns and legitimately expressed concerns about the fact that this may cost too much, that we simply can't afford to do what's being proposed in this legislation. Well, 73 years ago, the predecessor of this committee heard from then Chairman Sam Rayburn about the need to have a major energy advance. It was called the Rural Electrification Act of 1936. And some of the same arguments that we've heard mounted today about the need to protect the climate and whether we could afford to do it were put forward then. It was said that the technology did not exist to bring electricity to rural Americans. It was said that if it did exist, it would be simply too expensive and ruinous. Well, 73 years ago, this committee acted, and it passed out by one vote the Rural Electrification Act of 1936. And the result was an economy that the world still cannot beat. This is the world's greatest economy, and it's brought to that level in large part by electrification. It was that kind of technological advance and willingness to say, you know, we think these challenges can be met. Today, the challenge is even greater, and the stakes are higher, and the rewards are greater. But it's going to come down to the same thing, the men and women of this committee voting to do what we need to do to create the future that we need to create. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hawkins. And it comes in full circle, doesn't it? 73 years ago, we were voting to bring electricity to rural America. Now we're going to be voting on bringing electricity from rural America, the sun and the wind and biomass, to urban America. And we might only win by one vote. Okay? But that will be the perfect circle then when it's completed. Perfect. Our next witness is Eugene Trisco on behalf of the United Mine Workers of America. Mr. Trisco has represented the United Mine Workers for more than 20 years. He is a member of the Environmental Protection Agency's Clean Air Act Advisory Committee and has appeared before the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia concerning the Clean Air Act. Welcome, sir. If you could move in a little bit closer and turn on your microphone. I'm not sure that the microphone is on yet.
There you go. We have it.
Okay.
I'm pleased to be here today to testify on behalf of the United Mine Workers. The UMWA has sought technological solutions to the environmental challenges facing coal for decades. The UMWA recognizes that climate change legislation poses potentially the greatest threat to its membership and to the continued use of coal. In July 2007, the mine workers and other industrial unions endorsed the bipartisan Bingham-Inspector Climate Change Bill. Achieving the proper balance among technology incentives and the timing and stringency of emission reductions will be essential for obtaining bipartisan support for climate legislation. 1/2 of our electricity today is generated by coal. 23 states rely on coal for more than half of their electric supplies. To reduce coal in our energy mix means using another fuel to replace it for baseload generation, most likely a combination of natural gas and nuclear. There's a great deal in this proposed legislation that UMWA supports. We strongly endorse Section 114, incorporating the Carbon Capture and Storage Early Deployment Act, reintroduced this year by Representative Boucher and a bipartisan group of co-sponsors. The programs called for by this section will provide critical non-budget support for the early demonstration of CCS technologies on a commercial scale. CCS technology is the principal means for assuring that coal can continue to supply a significant share of our electric generating needs. These technologies also can provide a major source of new, well-paying, low-carbon jobs. Our statement summarizes a recent study showing that deployment of 65 to 100 gigawatts of new advanced coal capacity with CCS could create 5 to 7 million job years of employment during construction and more than 250,000 permanent jobs. The UMWA supports the objectives of the CCS incentives provided in Section 115. The mine workers recommend that the committee develop an allowance-based mechanism for funding qualifying CCS facilities. Such incentives will be critical to attracting capital investment in new and retrofit applications. The timing and availability of Section 115 support should provide planning certainty. We regard the period from 2020 to 2040 as critical for avoiding the large-scale loss of coal markets. As to scale, we recommend a range of 65 to 100 gigawatts of new and retrofit capacity based on U.S. EPA's analysis of previous climate bills. The mine workers recommend that the bill avoid specifying CO2 performance standards limited to coal-based generating units. NSPS are unnecessary for these sources since all cap sources will be required to comply with the bill's declining cap. To avoid the risk of WTO challenges, we suggest that the bill's international border adjustment provisions be modified consistent with IBEW and AEP's suggested changes submitted to the committee on April 17th. The UMWA favors the largest possible use of allowance allocations to the electric distribution and independent generation sectors and to vulnerable manufacturing industries. We support the recommended approach to allocations outlined in the recent letter to Chairman Waxman by the IBEW and the utility workers. The UMWA is mainly concerned about the 20% reduction target for the year 2020. This target is well above the 6% target proposed by the Dingell-Boucher December 2008 discussion draft and President Obama's proposed 14% target. Commercial use of CCS by 2020 is likely to be limited to a handful of early mover plants. Recent modeling of similar emission control proposals shows that 1/3 to 1/2 of coal-based generating capacity could be retired between 2015 and 2030. EPA's preliminary modeling of the bill shows this occurring by 2040, even with aggressive CCS assumptions. Such impacts must be avoided if the nation is to retain domestic coal as a principal energy supply. The UMWA thus urges moderation in the choice of the 2020 target, recognizing that the majority of the emission reductions required by the bill occur later in the program when technological advances should facilitate the continued use of coal. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Driscoll. Our next witness, Jonathan Briggs, who is Regional Director of Americans for Hydrogen Energy. Mr. Briggs is responsible for managing Hydrogen Energy's project in California and developing other hydrogen energy business opportunities in North America. Thank you, Mr. Briggs.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you for inviting me to testify before you today. HEI, or Hydrogen Energy International, offers commercial-scale deployment of low-carbon hydrogen fuel power plants with carbon capture and storage. It offers the ability to bring together the complementary skills of its two parent companies, BP and Rio Tinto. Hydrogen Energy, HEI, is currently developing two projects, one in Abu Dhabi, the other in California. Our project in California is located in Kern County and will distribute 250 megawatts of much-needed baseload low-carbon power. The project's primary feedstock is petroleum coke, a refinery byproduct along with coal as needed, and will capture and store 90% of its CO2 emissions in the Elk Hills oil field for sequestration and enhanced oil recovery. The project has been designed and developed to provide numerous environmental and economic benefits for the state. It will conserve freshwater resources by using brackish groundwater with zero liquid discharge. It will create 1,500 construction jobs and 100 permanent jobs in an economically depressed region of the state. And the project will also significantly boost state and local tax revenue from EOR. Just 2 months ago, the PUC voted 5-0 to a direct $30 million of support to our project. This is unprecedented and a demonstration of political leadership that first-mover projects such as ours need. And while I have the opportunity, I would like to thank the CPUC, including Commissioner Grunic, for recognizing the need for in-state, low-carbon baseload power. We filed for the planning permit and the site license and will be up and running by 2015, contingent on the development of appropriate policy support framework. In order to meet the aggressive emission reduction goals that are outlined in the draft ACES bill, CCS must be widely deployed, and quickly, to drive down the costs of future plants. Just as pre-combustion capture technology is proven, so is the storage of CO2. In the US, there are more than 3,500 miles of CO2 pipelines to support enhanced oil recovery, an activity which has been conducted safely and without incident for the last 30 years. We believe that storing CO2 in existing oil and gas fields in connection with the EOR will significantly advance the near-term deployment of CCS by bringing down the costs of early mover projects such as ours. Like other forms of clean energy, CCS is more expensive than conventional energy. The majority of the extra capital cost lies with the power plant rather than the sequestration activity. The cost of CCS today is more than $100 of CO2 per ton of CO2. That may seem like a lot, but remember, this technology is still in the early development stages, and despite other technologies having enjoyed years of learning, low-carbon hydrogen power with CCS is competitive with nuclear and renewable energies. So cost, while important, is not a reason to forego or stall the rollout of this technology. The draft ACES bill is a welcome first step to identifying CCS as a needed technology to mitigate GHG emissions. HEI appreciates the support shown for CCS in the Waxman-Markey draft, particularly fixed incentive payments where critical to project sanction, feedstock neutrality, and recognition of geologic sequestration combined with enhanced hydrocarbon recovery. In addition, we hope that any climate change bill would also recognize the need for early movers, provide clear and definitive performance qualification terms, and tie fiscal support to the levels of CO2 capture, such as the 90% that I referred to earlier. Before I close, I would like to leave the committee with one other recommendation regarding the regulatory certainty needed to allow CCS to move forward. We need one regulator, one set of regulations, and acknowledgement that EOR and sequestration can act simultaneously. I'd like to thank the committee for inviting me to testify before you today and remind you that CCS is ready today. We just need fixed, near, and medium-term incentives to get these projects off the ground. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Briggs. You had 10 seconds left. I'm just dying to know, is your sequestration through pumping into oil fields? Is that the sequestration system you're using? Thank you very much. That was most interesting. Our next witness is Mr. James Kerr, who is partner with McGuire Woods, LLP. He's previously served as commissioner on the North Carolina Utilities Commission and as president of the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners from 07 to 08. Today, he's appearing on behalf of the Electric Reliability Coordinating Council. Thanks, Mr. Kerr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My perspective today is that of a former utility regulator, and where I examined regulatory policy to be sure that it was both cost-effective and equitable among and between customer classes and across regions. My testimony focuses on the RES and the CCS portions of the bill that's before the subcommittee. Let me first focus in these remarks on what I believe to be certain inequities concern and cost-effectiveness concerns with the RES. I'm concerned that the bill as drafted will be both cost-ineffective and inequitable for ratepayers in the Southeast and Midwest where cost-effective renewable resources are limited. First, the first concern is that the RES conflicts with a market-based cap-and-trade program. Renewables are simply one option to decarbonize power fleets and reduce carbon. They may or may not be the most cost-effective option for doing that. However, and the price signal sent by the cap is supposed to decide this issue. Since the RES is a performance-based standard that must be complied with regardless of cost, it undermines the cap's basic least cost approach. In effect, the RES is a bet that renewables and not some other alternative will be the most cost-effective solution for carbon reductions under the cap, all the way up to the full amount of the RES. Most troubling to me is that there appear to be no economic studies supporting the fact that a 25% RES by 2025 will provide the most cost-effective carbon reduction, more cost-effective carbon reductions than the CAP program itself. Hence, I refer to the RES as a bet. Second, the RES gives ratepayers in resource-poor states 3 compliance options, each of which is uneconomic to them and provides little benefit. My second concern is that ratepayers in resource-poor states will be assessed significant costs to comply with the RES for which they will receive no benefit. Instead, the monies will flow to the benefit of the ratepayers in resource-rich states and either subsidize those ratepayers' RES compliance costs or those ratepayers' fleet decarbonization efforts and associated carbon cap costs. To illustrate this, I thought I would use an example where I'm a utility owner or a regulator, or for that matter, simply a citizen in a resource-poor state where renewables tend to cost more than in resource-rich states. I would have three choices available to me under this legislative proposal. First, I can build above market. By that I mean higher cost renewable power than the prevailing REC price renewables facilities in my state. That will ensure that green jobs and investment capital provided by ratepayers remains in state, and that will provide some benefits towards carbon compliance in state. But the cost for compliance with the RES will be higher than if other alternatives are adopted. However, since I also get a carbon benefit if I build my own renewables facilities, I need to subtract that cost savings from my renewables costs, and those economics will likely make me build some and perhaps many above market renewable facilities. That result makes sense to me and my ratepayers because it is the lowest cost solution to the dual compliance obligations of the carbon cap and the RES. But it makes no sense as national policy. The result will be nationally more above-market renewable facilities in the Southeast and Midwest and fewer economic renewables facilities in resource-rich states. And of course, since renewables will be part of the compliance with the carbon cap and the overall cost of renewables is higher than it need to be because above-market facilities are built, the cost of compliance with that cap nationally will be higher than they would be without the RES. My second choice is to purchase RECs to fund construction of renewable facilities in another state with better renewable resources. If I do that, my ratepayers' compliance costs with the RES will be lower, but I will have to go back to them for more money to fund investments in carbon reductions for my system, since I have received no carbon benefit from the renewable power facility funded by my ratepayers' REC dollars. In addition, I will have funded the creation of green jobs in the resource-rich state, but not my own, and I will have funded fleet decarbonization efforts in the resource-rich state through construction of a renewable facility, but not my own. As a consequence, I have subsidized the carbon compliance cost of the ratepayers in the resource-rich state, who will not see rate increases to fund the carbon reductions my renewable power facility has made for them. My third choice is to make an alternative compliance payment. This option would also allow my ratepayers to comply with the RES at a lower cost, but again, they see no carbon reduction benefits for the payments, and I will have to go back to them for additional monies to fund my own carbon reduction efforts. In addition, the monies I spend making alternative compliance payments are returned to the resource-rich states that complied with the RES and presumably refunded to those ratepayers. Thus, my alternative compliance payments subsidize RES compliance costs of citizens in resource-rich states, but my ratepayers see no benefits. As a former public servant and citizen, I do not like any of these choices. None make any economic sense to my ratepayers, and they do nothing to address climate change, since the cap already requires carbon reductions independent of the RES. Frankly, I'm baffled as to why I would have to make a choice between three such poor options. No one has told me that renewables up to the full amount of the RES are the most cost-effective way to reduce carbon. And no one has told me that the U.S. renewables industry cannot sustain itself based on the price signal the cap will send, the existing plethora of 33 state RES requirements, and other financial incentives available to renewables. It seems to me that the primary effect of the RES requirement is to pick winners and losers, and that the ratepayers in resource-rich states will be the clear winners, while ratepayers in resource-poor states will be the clear losers. I want to be clear, I'm not against renewables in any way. They are an important part of the toolkit to address climate change, and they will be employed at scale under any carbon cap up to the point that they are the most cost-effective alternative. What I am against is the imposition of a very large federal renewables mandate that effectively advantages ratepayers in resource-rich states and disadvantages ratepayers in resource-poor states for no compelling reason. While I do not see the need for any mandatory federal RES, my written testimony does have some suggestions that will limit but not eliminate these inequities. Finally, with respect to CCS, the ERCC supports the efforts in the bill to generate research, development, and deployment of CCS. We also, however, provide a couple of comments that might help shape that piece of the legislation. Thank you, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Kerr. Our next witness is Dr. Jay, is it Apt, sir? Dr. Jay Apt, who's Executive Director of the Carnegie Mellon Electricity Industry Center and an Associate Professor at Carnegie Mellon University. We hope Dr. Apt feels very much at home today because he has been in space, flying 4 times and logging more than 35 days in that environment and over 10 hours in spacewalks. We hope this is an easy experience. Dr. Apt, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I like to tell people that I'm probably the only person in the room who owes their life to solar cells. Appreciate not only the invitation, but your stamina. As you said, at Carnegie Mellon, I'm a faculty member in both the engineering school and the business college. I've studied the electric power industry for many years at our Carnegie Mellon Electricity Industry Center. Look, burning any appreciable fraction of the estimated fossil fuel resources on this planet without carbon dioxide control is going to send CO2 levels to places that humans have never experienced and cause really dangerous climate change. There's no question that the singular focus, our goal, ought to be controlling CO2. Renewable energy sources are going to be an important part of whatever we do in this country. But I caution that a singular emphasis on renewable energy is not the best way to meet that overriding goal of controlling CO2. We spend about 3% of GDP annually on electricity. Removing 80% of the CO2 from electric power with the most cost-effective technologies will take about 2/3% of GDP. That turns out to be just about what we spent on the Clean Air Act. That's affordable. But if we try to specify which technologies, like renewables, are the only ones that need apply, and don't allow the least expensive technologies to compete, costs can grow to unaffordable levels. It's important to develop competing low-carbon technologies to keep costs low, rather than trying to select technologies based on attributes that have little to do with controlling CO2. A national RES is a costly way to reduce CO2 emissions because renewable and low greenhouse gas are not synonyms. There's several other practical and often less expensive ways, and you heard about some of them just now, to reduce CO2 from electric power generation. As you know, renewable energy is concentrated only in certain states. The Southeast doesn't have either good wind or good solar. It does have biomass, but that's going to be needed for production of liquid fuels. Legislation should give each region the greatest flexibility to reduce CO2 at the least cost, including renewables, efficiency, conservation, fossil fuels with CCS, and nuclear. Mandating technologies can be much more expensive than mandating performance. Renewable performance standards unnecessarily increase costs in an attempt to eliminate the use of uranium, coal, natural gas, and large hydropower. What's needed instead is a carbon performance standard that lowers the limits in a predictable fashion on the emission of CO2 for every kilowatt hour produced. To affordably lower CO2, we're going to need everything that works. No power source is free of problems. Our research has examined what was then the largest solar array in the country in the desert in Arizona. It had a duty cycle, what we call the capacity factor, of 19%, averaged over 2 years. All the wind farms in Texas last year added together had a capacity factor of 29%. That means that 70% of the time, you've got to use something else. And our research shows that natural gas turbines used to provide fill-in power as the wind rises and falls or clouds cover the sun produce more CO2 and much more NOx, nitrous oxide, than they do when running steadily. That lessens the beneficial effects of wind or solar. One solution is to store large amounts of electricity when these sources are generating. The discussion draft doesn't appear to me to contain significant incentives for large-scale storage, and I think it ought to. If our industries are to be able to afford electricity, it's essential that demonstration coal plants with carbon capture be built to improve the technology and show that we can sequester CO2 without leakage in a range of geology. The Section 114 incentives seem to me to be at the low end of what's required to demonstrate the commercial viability of sequestration. It's also essential that we build half a dozen nuclear plants using new technology to assess their costs and performance, or we're going to be importing that technology from abroad. I hope that you'll keep two principles in mind. First, focus on reducing carbon dioxide rather than singling out renewables as the answer. There's significant savings from letting all the technologies compete in satisfying the goals of lowering greenhouse gas emissions and increasing energy security, while ensuring that energy prices aren't so high that they derail our economy. Second, ensure that efficiency gains in generating electricity, as well as in using it, can count in any low-carbon legislative mandate, such as Section 231 of the discussion draft. Thank you very much for the opportunity to testify. Along with my written testimony, I provided the subcommittee with one of our published papers. I think the research outlined in the paper might be of interest and value, and would ask that that be included as part of the hearing record.
So no objection, Dr. Abt. Thank you very much. We'll start questioning with Tammy Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for your patience and your testimony here this afternoon. We just returned to session from a recess, and over the course of my recess, I had a chance to do a great tour of some of the most innovative Wisconsin-based companies that are doing all sorts of exciting things in the energy area in anticipation of the work we're doing on the climate change bill. One of the places I visited is a company called Orion, based in Manitowoc, Wisconsin, and they're manufacturing a solar light pipe technology that can illuminate factory floors electricity-free by concentrating daylight. Just last month, the company was even touted by President Obama for having innovators and creating jobs that will foster our economic recovery and create clean technology to power our long-term prosperity. Now, like the solar light pipe, there exist a number of distributed renewable energy resources such as solar water heaters, solar air heating and cooling, geothermal heat pumps that deliver measurable and verifiable renewable energy at the load source. These technologies help businesses and homeowners lower their utility bills, and because they produce clean energy at the load source, they certainly lessen the burden on our nation's transmission infrastructure. As I understand it and have looked into it, some states have included these technologies in their renewable portfolio standards, and others have not, because these technologies do not actually generate electricity, even though we can sort of monitor virtually with meters the electricity consumption displaced by these technologies. So I want to ask, I think Mr. Riker and Commissioner Grunich, do you think these types of technologies should be considered as a part of our renewable energy technologies, and can they provide benefits under a national renewable portfolio or electricity standard?
Yes and yes. Let me also say I want to congratulate your state. We're not talking about energy efficiency, but in a recent report, you're ranked number 5 in the country. And I'm very happy to hear about some of the technologies that's being developed. And I think that this is an example where we see innovation at the state level. And I think that it definitely is an example of the types of new technologies coming online that can and should be included when we're looking at the renewable standard.
And I would add that, as you know, there is already a 3x multiplier for on-site generation. It'd be interesting to take a look at what of these technologies might be included, and if not, how that might be adjusted. That's number one. Number two, of course, the Energy Efficiency Resource Standard would capture some of the value of this as well by cutting electricity demand. So I think the interplay between the two of those should at least help these technologies. What we may want to do is look a little bit further and see whether there's ways to move them forward even better.
Well, and that was precisely my second question: of should this technology be a part of the energy efficiency resource standard? And you sort of jumped to that answer already. On the distributed generation multiplier, another one of my stops on my tour last week was to an anaerobic digester on a dairy farm. Now, I think Wisconsin is the leader in the country in deployment of anaerobic digester systems, but all of them are smaller than 2 megawatts. The one that I visited is generating enough electricity for about 600 homes in the area. And the proposed definition in our draft discussion bill right now would exclude small biomass generation systems from receiving the distributed generation credit multiplier because they rely on combustion. And the proposal appears to make distributed solar and wind more valuable than distributed biomass. And I guess I would want to ask your opinion also on this, what guidance you would give our committee as we get into the details of the bill on this issue of should it count or not. Again, Commissioner?
I'll say that we're facing in California, as we've had now a couple years under our belt, well, I guess 3 or 4 now, on our renewable standard, that as the technology is improving, and we've got a project that Pacific Gas and Electric Company is doing also with one of our dairy farms, where we're seeing that we do have to look at modifying our definition of what qualifies. And I think that it'll be important for the committee to really take a look throughout the country at what are the different projects that have emerged, take a good look at the definitions, and I totally concur with Dan. Let's make sure that things don't fall between the cracks of what's considered a renewable or what's considered an energy efficiency, and it doesn't qualify for either one. So I think that's some real good homework. We want to capture the most innovative projects.
Thank you. Chairman, I was going to ask a question to our carbon capture and sequestration experts. I see my time has expired. I don't know if you'll do a
Well, the
second
chair
round.
is extending an additional minute to all committee members who are so dedicated to be here right now.
Oh, well, thank you. Along with my other stops on my energy tour, I got a chance to visit a coal plant owned by We Energies in Wisconsin that is doing a demonstration project on carbon capture, not the sequestration part, but they're right now succeeding in capturing 90% of the CO2 emitted, but only doing this demonstration project on 1% of the flue gas. So it's a small and demonstration project. A larger scale project, sort of tenfold the size, will be underway soon, I think, in West Virginia. I would love our CCS experts to address a couple of quick questions. One is the job creation potential. The second is, if we do not have a cap in the end, would you expect full-scale commercial deployment of this technology without it? I have concerns that we wouldn't. And then finally, this is a huge issue, but Wisconsin is not particularly geologically, well, we don't have the geological formations necessary for storage in state, which brings up transportation issues. And I wonder whether the funds collected by the CCS provisions of the bill will apply to research into transportation for CO2 and the costs associated with that. But I know that's broad, but I would love to hear our CCS experts address those 3 areas.
We've been following the We Energies project there too, and they're tackling one of the most interesting parts of this that could have big promise for reducing the costs of it, which is the energy efficiency penalty using ammonia technology. And we think that's very promising, and we're following that technology and considering it very, very closely. That sort of goes to one of your questions. Your second question was jobs, and yeah. Yeah, certainly large-scale deployment won't happen without there being some kind of a market value if society doesn't value the reduction of emissions some way, and that has to happen. And what we're working at is getting the cost of that down where it happens at a reasonable price, and we believe that can happen as well. Jobs, our projects in both Texas and Illinois will imply that for one thing, they take a long time to build. It's like a 4-year construction cycle, 1,500 jobs, at the peak, and even as many as 2,000 in some cases. So, for a retrofit project, that would be much less, but it's still a very substantial project employing a significant number of people.
Thank you. We're now moving on to Mr. Upton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Abt, I want to come back to your testimony. You talked about a carbon performance. So if you looked at that as the base for an RPS, you probably could include nuclear as part of that, right? Because it's got no greenhouse gas emissions. That would be eligible.
Certainly. One of the statistics that I like to tell people is in my home state of Pennsylvania, we are nearly last in renewables, but we're first in low carbon because of the percentage of nuclear that we have.
Now, why you said that the solar array in Arizona was only 19%, which means that it's out?
Sure. It can't be more than 50% because it's night half the time. The thing
I know
really
they don't have daylight savings time as well, so that's
right.
probably another hour that we could.
The thing that surprised us was that it wasn't higher than it is, and it's because of the intermittency caused by the clouds. We've taken a look at some of the other solar arrays in other locations. The DOE has a solar roof here, and that's 11%, as it turns out.
Now, thank you. Mr. Robo, you mentioned that you are managing the largest solar bank in the world. Is that right?
That's right.
The Mojave Desert. How big is it? How many? What's the size?
300 megawatts.
What's the footprint? How big is the
footprint? Is tens of acres. It's about an acre per megawatt, so around 300 acres.
And you know, there's been some debate that I've seen in the press. We mentioned this either today or yesterday, one of these hearings, that the senior senator from California has not been all that supportive. Is that true or not? Is it this project or is it another one in the Mojave?
No, it's not our project. Our project's already built.
And, so this is this another project that's going to rival you as the largest in the world then?
There are several new projects that are being considered in California. We have several that are that are trying to be permitted right now. Other folks are trying to permit projects. Our actually two projects that are furthest along in the permitting process are outside of Senator Feinstein's area.
Now, when you began the construction of this, or get the licensing and the approvals, did you have trouble hooking it into the transmission lines? And how long did that take?
These projects, the projects we have right now in California, are actually quite old. They were built in the late 80s, early 90s, and took several years to develop. Any large-scale solar project in any of the areas that we're looking at, and we're developing large-scale solar projects in Florida, California, Arizona, Colorado, and it really depends on the jurisdiction. We've built 110 megawatts of solar in Florida in the space of a year.
So would you like to see
California would take 5 years.
Would it be helpful in this bill, if this bill moves forward, to have some type of allowance to allow FERC to step in if folks like your seatmate there are not entirely cooperative in getting things hooked up?
We think having FERC have ultimate siting authority
is a good
makes
thing.
sense.
Okay, Mr. Greenwich, a quick thing. You talked about California going to 33% by 2020. I seem to remember that at one point they were 20% by next year. Is that right?
We have our current law is 20% by next year. There is some what's called flexible provisions that will allow it to be another year or two probably, but we're on target.
So you think they'll hit it?
Yes.
I'm not from California.
Yes.
We didn't get that question that way. Okay. Last question that I have in my minute that's remaining, Mr. Briggs, Kerr, and Triscoe. As we look at the issue of carbon capture, something that has to be part of coal's future, there's nothing in this bill, as I understand it, relating to the long-term liability issues. Does that need to be part of this? Does that? You could each comment on that. I don't know if you had it cited in the longer part of your testimony or not.
The bill contains a provision for research on long-term liability issues, and we think that underscores the need for resolution of the long-term liability question.
Would the others disagree? Dr. Kunkel, would you agree? I mean, maybe just to speed this along in my remaining 5 seconds.
Yeah, I do think there's the need for kind of a study, but there's also, we have a project that we want to take to financing next year. So I think there needs to be some consideration for the pioneering projects, a first group of projects, and to take care of those.
And just very quickly, one of the advantages of our parent companies being familiar with the subsurface, we're willing to move ahead of these sorts of frameworks not being defined because we're comfortable with it. But we've also suggested a framework for liability as it moves through a project from operatorship to post-closure.
Congressman Upton, I would say yes, completely. And I would also point out, and I think Representative Baldwin mentioned the transportation issue in your question, there are a number of these issues around CCS that are very important. And one of the things that this subcommittee needs to focus on is when you look at EPA analysis of this bill and bills in the last Congress, there are very aggressive assumptions about when resources like CCS will be available, and yet they don't match up with what the realistic issues like liability, transportation. So I think when you look at the analysis, look at the assumptions, and then realize there are a plethora of what seem like sort of minor issues, the sooner we deal with those in a bill like this, I think the more rapidly we can deploy those technologies, which then will maybe justify some of the assumptions being used in the economic analyses.
Dr. Abt?
At CMU, we have started a large project on the legal and regulatory environment for deep underground sequestration. And a lot of paths through the thicket lead to dead ends. We've put out a draft of a working paper on that. We give a presentation on January. We'd be happy to talk with you more about it. We're expecting to put out a final on that later in this summer, and we'd love to work with you all.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Proceed. Mr. Riker, thanks for being here. Thanks for Google's vision and the work they're doing. I want to ask you, you alluded to the necessity for some financing mechanism across what has been called the Valley of Death, particularly for the first commercial projects. There are a couple approaches that have been proposed. I have proposed one approach, and we've tried to focus in our approach somewhat more narrowly than others to make sure we really target the risky adventures that really do not have access to commercial lending credit, narrower as far as the target, but broader as far as allowing the use of the full financial tools that could be available, multiple systems to really finance these. I just wonder if you want to comment on those approaches and what you think we need.
Congressman, I think the approach that I know you're looking at, which is quite similar to the approach that Senators Bingaman and Murkowski are looking at, I do think that is the right way to go, and let me explain why I reached that conclusion. The issue we face is the following. There is today in developing new energy technology, both private and public capital to get technologies to the pilot stage. We have a burgeoning venture capital world. There is a variety of funding available at the federal level for the lower cost development of this to the pilot stage. The Valley of Death begins when you get a technology, whether it's renewables, efficiency, clean coal, a whole host of technologies. When you get to that successful pilot stage, and you've got to go from there to large commercial deployment. But it is those first few large commercial projects that the bankers will say, too risky, we're not interested, come back when you've built the first couple and talk to us then. That's the Valley of Death, and that's what your bill, and that's what Senator Bingaman and Murkowski's bill would deal with well. The tools, as you say, are quite broad. Loans, loan guarantees, other credit enhancements, and also secondary market support so that we could, in fact, develop clean energy-backed bonds as well. So a whole set of tools focused right on that really critical moment where so many technologies across the entire energy spectrum die between pilot scale and multiple large commercial projects being built. So I salute you in what you're doing. Senators Bingaman and Murkowski are doing a hearing next Tuesday to try to advance this.
Great. Thank you very much. Dr. Kunkel, your effort, the Tenaska project, I'm told is in Taylorville, Illinois. Is it?
Yeah,
is that right?
Taylorville, Illinois.
Yeah. Is that Mr. Shimkus's district?
It
do you
is.
know? It's a great district. He's a great congressman, of course. So if you're successful, and we've got a cap and trade bill that helps drive investment into your project because your project will be more cost competitive once we have a cap and trade system, would that allow people to continue to mine coal, also create jobs associated with your project, and continue the coal-based economy of that area?
It would definitely spur the development of these types of projects, and that project in particular.
And would the existence of a cap and trade system increase your attractiveness to investors to invest in that coal sequestered technology? Would it make it more attractive vis-a-vis other technologies?
We believe it's going to be attractive in any case because of the particular conditions of the project, but certainly that would be helpful kind of setting a framework in which those investments are going to be encouraged in the future.
Well, I will happily fulfill the responsibility of conveying that to Mr. Shimkus, that a cap-and-trade system could help a business in his district and employ perhaps 1,500 people. Thank you for that. Dr. App, you said something that was really interesting to me. I think, and I want to make sure that I understood your assessment, and I think you bring up a very interesting point. As I understand what you told us, that if we are successful in policies that do in fact find the least costly ways of dealing with this, and I understand that's an if at the moment, you have some critique of that effort, but if we are successful in that regard, do I understand that the costs you've assessed are about 2/3% of GDP, which are in the range of what we did successfully in the Clean Air Act?
That's correct, if the costs are kept to $35 to $50 a ton of CO2. The difficulty is that that applies to things like coal with CCS. It does not apply to things like natural gas with post-combustion capture that could be about $80 a ton of CO2. At the moment, the best solar PV or solar thermal are many multiples of that.
So if I can, how much loss to the GDP, the no action scenario, if we do nothing, if we do what some have suggested here, which is basically nothing, not to address this issue of climate change, is the amount of loss to our GDP due to drought and, changes in the climate, perhaps some health-related impacts? Do you think those reductions of our economic well-being will exceed what we tried to avoid in the Clean Air Act? Is this a worse problem than what we tried to solve in the Clean Air Act?
The answer is a complicated one because it depends on the details regionally of what happens. In California, one of the things that drove people to action there was the prediction that the snowpack in the Sierra would be much worse off a few years from now without control of CO2. That's not going to be the case every place. There's going to be winners and losers. In the Clean Air Act, there was a clear, or I should say a dirty and present danger. It's a conceptual thing at the moment for most people. That's why downscaling studies like the Sierra snowpack are so very important in making people understand how it affects them.
Well, let me just, I don't want to take too much time, but I'll just tell you one congressman's assessment is that the danger to our communities and the danger to our nation has the capacity to be quite a bit more severe than what we were suffering under the Clean Air Act for the whole variety of different reasons. And that because of that, an investment anywhere close to what we did with the Clean Air Act would make sense because of the potential danger we face.
I would concur. Any investment of the type, the 2/3% of GDP that we did in the Clean Air Act, not only makes sense, but it's clear that we accepted that, although with a great deal of kicking and screaming. Anything much more than that, certainly many multiples of that, is probably a very different animal.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Mr. Waldman of Oregon.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Dr. App, I'm going to go back to you because you said solar is about $80 a ton carbon equivalent?
No, that's natural gas with post-combustion capture at the moment. Solar PV and solar thermal are many times that.
Many times that.
It depends.
Because
at the moment, you could bring in a good solar thermal plant for perhaps $200 a ton of avoided CO2, and Mr. Robode would.
The reason I asked that is yesterday we had testimony from the EPA administrator, Ms. Jackson, who indicated their analysis of this bill, given whatever they plugged in. I thought she said in the first few years was $17 a ton for carbon. But that's what they used as a price, and then maybe as much as 20 or 30. We're trying to get all those data points. And so I find it fascinating. You're saying 35 to 50 and maybe as high as 80.
It's one of the reasons why I think that a carbon performance standard is going to be much more effective than a, let's say, $17 a ton, because it's going to affect investment. It's going to take $35 to $50 a ton to really affect investment in the area I know about, the electric power industry. Or you can do a carbon portfolio standard that says, as California has done, you can emit no more than X, in that case 1,100 pounds of CO2 per megawatt hour, and that declines.
Okay. I'm going to move now down to Mr. Is it Greenspec or Gruenspect? Thank you, sir. Because in your testimony, and I've now worn out a pair of reading glasses, so I apologize the lack of one side. In absolute terms, the key fuels are projected to be biomass and wind, but other renewable fuels, including solar and geothermal, are also projected to grow significantly in percentage terms. What would constitute the biomass that you reference?
Well, there could be both co-firing of biomass in existing plants that currently burn coal.
And that would be like woody biomass?
That'd be woody biomass that could be used, in a modest proportion as part of the feed to that existing plant. That's attractive to the extent there's not a big capital investment involved.
Would that be the primary source you're looking at when you use the term
or you could have
biomass?
dedicated biomass crops. You could have switchgrass as well, can be burned as well as.
Because, and I've raised this issue every other chance I've had, is the deal with woody biomass off federal land. And Mr. Hawkins, I understand NRDC is the one who's responsible for the language in the 07 energy bill that precluded fuel sources made from woody biomass off federal lands from being applied toward the renewable fuel standard. Is that correct?
We supported safeguards so that we would not have adverse land use changes associated with the renewable fuels.
So it was your language then, or you were the ones principally supporting
Well, I
that?
wish we had the power to actually write language and have it show up in legislation.
So did you have any role in the language regarding biomass in this discussion draft? Did NRDC have any role in this biomass language in this draft?
We didn't review any draft before you saw it.
Did you submit draft language? Did you participate in the discussions on what you thought ought to be? And that's not a bad thing, by the way. I'm just trying to figure it out.
I don't believe we submitted any language on the biomass provisions, but if we did,
do you support these biomass provisions that are in this bill?
Do we support them?
Yeah.
Yes.
And so you think it's okay to exclude all woody biomass off federal lands from being considered as biomass?
We think that until and unless we have safeguards in place that address everyone's concerns about the impact of sourcing some of these biomass resources, that it's an appropriate safeguard, yes.
To just simply say woody biomass off federal land isn't biomass? That's what you say.
To say that it shouldn't be an eligible source of a resource for purposes of complying with this obligation.
Okay.
I think
And that's
appropriate policy, yes.
And obviously you can have that opinion. I disagree vehemently with it, as you might have noticed by now, and hope to change it. Miss, I'm sorry, I can't read your, Grunick.
Not to be confused with Gruenspect.
Got it. And it's turned as well.
It's a very green panel.
It is. It is. The German end of the panel. And Mr. Riker, too. First of all, Google's got a facility in my district. One of the reasons is because of our low-cost hydropower, which I think is renewable, but this bill does not. But I want to go to geothermal, because I think both of you may have mentioned that. I was told by our scientists at Oregon Institute of Technology we could replace 2/3 of Oregon's electricity generation needs with geothermal. I've also been told by University of Washington scientists you could replace all of Oregon's gasoline consumption with methanol made from woody biomass due to the backlog on our forests. So it looks to me like there are some enormous opportunities here to use new energy types in a very effective way. When we move off of that, though, and into distributive energy, which I think is also a key element, and gets at the real issue of transmission, which you've raised, we've got a huge fight out across my district right now about the siting of transmission lines, principally because they go over federal land. In one case, a company, I believe, is trying to avoid any federal land because of the siting fights. So now they're going to try and drive it right over everybody's farm and field, which is another huge problem. In the other case, we may deny an entire wind project over 180 acres of BLM ground that they need to run the supply line to private land. How do we address these issues?
I've spent 4 years on transmission permitting, and I just will say it's not in the bill. I think one of the most significant provisions that somebody needs to put in a bill on transmission the planning part is great, and I'll talk a moment about that, but we have huge problems with the federal land use agencies in transmission permitting. And I hear a lot about the problem are the state agencies. Just about every land permit, every transmission project in California, and it sounds like in Oregon, and it's a lot in the West, ends up going through federal lands. And we need somewhere in all these bills that are going through on transmission, something this is my personal opinion, that really talks about the federal land use agencies having to streamline their transmission permitting projects. We do MOUs with BLM and U.S. Forest Service on a regular basis that has schedules, and they never stick to the schedules. We've had projects that an entire year has been lost after we've permitted them under our CEQA, our environmental review, which is tough, and we still wait another year to finish the federal permitting. So I am a strong believer that this cuts both ways, that it's the federal land use agencies and a little bit of language in there that has them streamlining some of their processes could help. There's a terrific process, I'll just be real quick, going on in the entire western United States called Western RES, the Renewable Energy Zone, that is looking at every single state, and nobody's worrying about, you know, red, green, blue, anything. That's really going down to the level, again, of transmission planning we need, of what are those resources in the states. And we're finding some really good information. We talk about, we think that states are resource poor on renewables. When we're actually spending time looking at this, we're finding that there's a lot more, frankly, than we thought about. And so I do think that this is a ray of hope that we're going to be able to come together. And once we know those resources, that's where we're able to look at what are the transmission lines that are going to make sense, and then get our act together. And if they are the ones we need, let's get them built.
Mr. Walden, if I could just add, one of the other aspects of this is improving citizen engagement, getting people involved earlier, giving them the information they need to understand what the options are in terms of transmission. We've been working with some organizations, including actually NRDC, at actually building mapping capabilities, using Google tools and other kinds of tools to get this information to people. If you engage them earlier, if you give them the options, walk them through the process, often some of the opposition can be overcome. But I would second what Commissioner Grunig said about the critical need to engage federal agencies more readily.
Mr. Chairman, I know we're over. Are we going to have a second round opportunity questions? This is such a great panel, but there's so many of them.
Okay, and there are so few of us that I think we can do that then.
Perfect.
As a result, I think it works out well.
Thank you, Mr.
Chairman. Chair will recognize himself at this point for a round of questions. And you know, I think there's two ways you can look at the renewable issue. You can look at it in a rearview mirror, or you can look out the windshield at the future as it's arriving. So you can use two sets of numbers. One set of number can be, oh my goodness, only 1 or 2 or 3% of our electricity comes from renewables, excluding hydro. That's not a good picture. How are we ever going to be able to provide the electrical generation we need for our country in the future? Of course, another way of looking at it is 2008, 8,500 new megawatts of wind generated in our country, 400 new megawatts of solar generated in our country, 205 new megawatts of biomass generated in our country, 138 new megawatts of geothermal generated in our country, only 1,100 new megawatts of coal, and 9,700 megawatts of natural gas, 0 in nuclear. So my goodness, when you add it all up, 45% of all new electrical generation in the United States in 2008 was from renewables. And that's before we pass a national renewable electricity standard. So if we were looking out the windshield, looking ahead, and we had a national renewable electricity standard, and we had the incentives that were put on the books in order to give incentives for states and individual companies to deploy renewables. If you look at the state of Texas, having the legislature authorized $5 billion to build a transmission system out to the west in the state to capture the wind and the solar. If you look at the Florida Power and Light initiatives, how many new megawatts of solar in Florida, Mr. Robo?
110.
110. You can see that all over the country there is massive new interest. And Dr. Kunkel, you have a technology that you believe is going to give coal a big future as well, because you believe that we can capture the carbon that is generated from coal burning. Is that correct?
No, that's right. And we think there's technologies we can get financed and go to construction next year.
I'm feeling so good, after this panel, and that's why I do want a second round. This is just, this is, you guys are like walking antidepressant pills, okay, sitting at this panel. So thank you for coming in today. Mr. Triscoe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We didn't comment directly in our prepared statement on the RES requirements, but your question recalls.
Can I say this? That was not a question. My question there was in the form of an answer. Okay, so just so you understand, I was just laying out what the answer is going forward, but you can take it as a question, and please comment.
I will interpret it as such, Mr. Chairman. It calls to my mind Commissioner Carr's comments regarding the effects of a cap-and-trade program on providing significant incentives in the market to bring new renewable energy supplies on. And that very much will be the case, particularly if allowances, as we advocate, are given to the wires companies, to the distribution companies. The first power sources that they will want to obtain to sell to their customers will be power sources for which they don't have to give up an allowance, that are zero carbon-based sources. So that will create the correct market incentives in the renewable resource-rich states that the Commissioner referred to, in order to develop those in a very cost-effective and rational manner.
Thank you, sir, very much. In listening to the testimony, and Mr. Robo, you're making money on this all across the country. You're very optimistic, huh?
We're very optimistic.
About the vast capacity for our country to generate electricity from renewable sources?
That's right.
It's going to be a profit-making business?
It is a profit-making business, and you can be successful being green, and I think that's been a critical part of our strategy over the last decade.
Thank you. And again, back to you, Dr. Kunkel. Do you have reason to give really a sense of confidence to the coal miners, to the coal industry, that there's a real future ahead for them and that technology will catch up and make them compatible with our goals in reducing greenhouse gases?
Yeah, we do look at it differently. I mean, we're developers of power projects. That's what we do for a living. And for us, the impediment is not these rules, but the lack of rules. What we need is a set of rules where we can move forward, we can finance projects knowing what the rules are going to be in the future. And in the absence of those rules is quite an impediment to coal-based development.
So in your opinion, the best friend of the coal industry will be that we put predictable, consistent rules on the books, and then the technology will come into place that makes that electrical generating source compatible with the goals that we're setting for the country.
I think there have been legitimate concerns about the viability of the technology. Things that we're doing are going to be, many times larger than the next largest one. And so we do need some time to go through this scale-up process. But we're convinced we can do it, and we can move forward. And then once those pioneering projects have demonstrated themselves, I think the opportunities for broad deployment are definitely there.
Great. And again, I would like maybe perhaps you, Mr. Briggs, you could deal with that decline in the cost of generating renewables that Mr. Robo was talking about earlier, this 25% decline that's occurred over the last decade. Do you see the same thing happening over in CCS? Do you see the once the marketplace is established, that we'll see a development of a technology, but then a declining cost curve for the deployment of that technology?
Excuse me, I believe so, yes. I mean, the main thing is to get out there and start getting on the learning curve. And I just wanted to go on record and answer your question that you just asked in yes. Yes, we can.
Thank you, sir.
The technology is there today.
Thank you. No, I appreciate that. Thank you. My time has expired. Let me turn and recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Burgess.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't want to create any new depression for you, but actually...
He's a physician, so he won't do it. I know he won't do it.
I find myself agreeing with you from
The Hippocratic Oath.
time. And I'm so happy that you recognize the vision and contribution of not just our current governor of Texas, but our former governor, that would be George W. Bush, who had the foresight and vision to create this renewable portfolio and standard, which allows us to be the #1 wind generating state in the country.
I come here to praise Governor Bush for what he did in the 1990s.
And I'll have to tell you, too, that I find I didn't expect to be encouraged today, but I have been. It's probably more muted than your encouragement. But, Dr. Abt, your testimony, and I really appreciate your honesty and recognize that there are a lot of areas where we disagree, but your last two thesis statements that you have in your written testimony that you related to us probably may be the most important testimony that we've received in the last 1,000 hours of testimony we've had on this subject in this committee. Focus on reducing carbon dioxide rather than singling out renewables as the answer. I mean, it's the simplicity, it's almost, I'm going to use it like a haiku or something that I can repeat to myself. This is the correct direction in which for us to go. I've been terribly disturbed by what I see are some of the inequities in the draft language for a state like Texas that has made the incredible investment to get to where it is, and yet if we have the federally mandated renewable energy standard, we may not produce the percentage that's going to be required, although as far as the number of megawatts we're producing with renewable energy, we're far ahead of everyone else. But your concept of let all technologies compete in satisfying the goals would mean to me then that the technology of energy conservation and some of the newer things that are happening with attic systems and insulation, low E glass, high efficiency air conditioners, tankless water heaters, that those should be eligible to be considered just the same as the newest nanotechnology photovoltaic solar cell. So I'm encouraged when I hear you say that, and I hope that we're, unfortunately the chairman was out of the room, that's why I wanted to be sure I repeated it. The chairman was out of the room when you gave your testimony. I think this is something that I would like to see us work on in that draft language. There is to limit the number of the percentage that a state like Texas could take credit for in creating efficiencies does not seem to me to be fair. The creation of a standard that is almost unattainable in a state that is as large as Texas and produces as much power as we do, those concepts have been very troubling to me, that we may mandate a federal system that sends our already robust state system and moves it into a condition of noncompliance, or one where our ratepayers may be punished because we can't quite get up to the percentage standard. I am and I remain concerned about some of the distributional problems we have. Again, a state as large as Texas. Mr. Reicher, I apologize, I was out of the room when you gave your testimony, but picking up on what you were discussing with Mr. Walden, clearly there are more innovative ways of going about siting and providing the transmission capacity than what historically has happened in the past. And our good friend Boone Pickens back home, who's anxious to get his electrons from Amarillo back to the Metroplex, perhaps there are ways to do that without disrupting all of the farmers and ranchers and landowners who live betwixt and between, and that's been the tension, and that has been the problem. And then, of course, it's not just Amarillo and Dallas; it's out Interstate 10 and back to the Houston metropolitan area, the San Antonio metropolitan area. So we have a lot of wind generation capacity. It's just not where the folks are, and then bringing the electrons back to where the folks are has been the challenge. Not that they haven't made great strides in the last 10 years; they have. Yes, sir.
Congressman, by way of another antidepressant, let me point out that your state of Texas, I'm looking at actually the resource map for enhanced geothermal systems. You have an extraordinary resource in Texas. Your total generating capacity today is about 100,000 megawatts. That's all sources, coal, gas, wind. 2% of your EGS, enhanced geothermal source, would represent over 175,000 megawatts. I learned something that you probably know well. You have a quote-unquote problem in Texas called hot oil. It turns out what hot oil is when you drill down, you find high-temperature oil in many parts of the state, and that's because there's a really robust geothermal resource down there. What oil companies in your state are now beginning to look at quite carefully is how can we both continue to extract oil and gas, but how can we also begin to develop the geothermal resource? And as I say, yours is a very vast one. It's well distributed. You'd reduce the need for transmission capacity. So I actually think you could get to a 25 by 25 quite readily. Given the wind resource, given this geothermal resource, given the solar resource, you can get there and you can be making money at it.
Well, I don't disagree with that, but I would also, to Dr. App's point, there is no point in discriminating against one technology over the other. And if we have two nuclear plants, one of which is being doubled in size in the next several years, why not get credit for that as well? If we have a robust program of going back and retrofitting homes with energy products that increase energy efficiency, why not get credit for that as well?
You do, absolutely. The RPS, the RES as written, would allow you to get 1/5 of the mandate met through energy efficiency. That is, in fact, quite clear and in my mind, quite an improvement.
Well, let me just ask a question, Dr. Abt. Is that the fact that it's restricted to 1/5, does that really comply with your philosophy of treating all carbon equally?
My view is that renewables are absolutely a part of the solution, but that by mandating a particular technology, whether it be EGS or solar or biomass, you're constraining the problem so that you increase costs and may have other effects. EGS, the big effect in Texas will be water. I think that in general, you have got to focus on one issue, and here it's reducing CO2.
And if we use the reduction of CO2 as the currency, then whether it's from energy efficiency, whether it's from other areas, it does not all have to be wind, solar, and biomass. New hydro. Yes, sir. I'm sorry.
If I might add, one of the points I tried to make was if you're going to have an RES, there will be favored and disfavored states based on the availability of the favored technologies. If you are going to have an RES, and again, I'm not sure it's consistent with the CAP proposal, but if you would allow efficiency to operate in an unfettered manner, efficiency is available everywhere. Efficiency put on equal footing with generation would smooth out some of those resource discrepancies and then the associated cost inefficiencies and discrepancies that would flow. So if you're going to persist, and I'm not sure you should, I think it would be a huge improvement to allow efficiency to operate in an unfettered manner.
Yeah, I really think it's the common ground that I have with Mr. Markey. And you can see that I've depressed him by going over time. So
No, not at all, not at all. Again, I have nothing to do. I'm willing to go on indefinitely on this subject. I love this subject. I find it exciting, to be honest with you. So the gentleman from Utah, Mr. Matheson.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Greenick, I should tell you, as someone who represents a large public land state, your comments about the challenges of dealing with federal land agencies and permitting are certainly, I'm sympathetic to what you're saying. And I think as part of a discussion about encouraging opportunities for new types of generation, renewable energy, to have an opportunity to get to market in this country, we do have to have a serious discussion in this committee and in this legislation about how to encourage siting of transmission, because it's not happening now. and there are impediments to it. And I think it's something where the draft legislation is a little light right now. And so any suggestions people have in that to beef up that part of the bill to encourage development of transmission infrastructure, I think would be very welcome to everyone. I think that's one of the least I think everybody in this committee, actually on both sides of the aisle, has a pretty strong feeling about the need for enhanced transmission infrastructure. At the risk of going a little bit off topic for what this panel was asked to talk about, which was low carbon electricity and carbon capture and storage and renewables, I wanted to at least frame the issue also associated with renewable fuel standard that was passed by this Congress previously. Do you think that this legislation ought to revisit that issue? And I may be asking the wrong panel this question, but it seems to me that the corn ethanol policy we've had in this country is actually creating far more greenhouse gases in the life cycle context than people first anticipated, and a lot of organizations have come up with information to help validate that. And the subsidy of corn ethanol, in my opinion, is, personally, I think it's bad federal policy at this point. Do people think that we ought to take a look at opening that up as part of this effort as we look at broad-based energy legislation? And again, I apologize if folks in this committee, that's not their area of expertise. But somebody have a thought on that? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you, Congressman Matheson. I'm Dave Hawkins from NRDC, and NRDC is a part of U.S. Climate Action Partnership, and U.S. CAP has recommended a low-carbon fuel standard and recommended that it be one that is implemented as we transition from the renewable fuel standard.
Right.
And the speed of that transition, the timing of that transition, the conditions of that transition are things that this committee will need to wrestle with. But we do think that having a low-carbon fuel standard that applies to all of the transportation fuel options, including electricity, which actually does connect to the topic of this, because if we do produce electricity with carbon capture and storage and use it to run plug-in hybrids,
Then
we
there
can
you go.
back out oil that way as well.
right.
And that should be regarded as a low-carbon fuel.
And I concur. I think the low-carbon fuel standard is the way to go, and I think that the current RFS should be phased out, so I think that's helpful. In terms of...
May I make just one
Sure,
remark on
go
that,
ahead.
which is that we've done some analysis of the California low-carbon fuel standard. It's superb. It's really an excellent way to reduce greenhouse gas, and it has the right structure.
And here I was going to just bring it up, so I'll defer to Dr. Apps.
But I think it's consistent with what you said before. You're not picking a specific technology. You're saying set the standard and let the market figure out the best way to reach it. And I think that is what we've seen. And as opposed to Congress saying, oh, well, let's make ethanol from corn. And that has not been as adequate.
Let me make just one remark that harks back to something that was said earlier about transmission. Bringing in the folks early is really crucial. A federal eminent domain is unlikely to do anything more than get people to dig in their heels. It's just not going to go down that way.
Well, those are fighting words where I come from, federal eminent domain, so.
You know, I mean, what actually happens when you look at a lot of the transmission that's gotten built is that people monetize their pain.
Yeah.
And it happened in Connecticut with a cross-sound cable. It's happening over West Virginia with AEP's line. And folks get involved, and they get their pain recognized. They get people to respect them, and then the transmission gets built. It doesn't get built with eminent domain.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, my time's about to expire. I'll yield back. Thanks.
I think so we need Dr. Burgess back again, because now we're at the pain management, okay? And, but it can be managed, okay? As long as you're willing to pay the price. Gentleman from Florida, Mr. Stearns.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I obviously welcome Mr. Robo, who's CEO of Florida Power and Light. I don't know when you got hired whether they told you this is part of your job description to sit here on a Thursday afternoon at 5:15 answering these questions. But we appreciate your being here, and also Florida Power and Light is one of the leaders in Florida as renewables, so that they're been way ahead of the curve, and so they saw this in advance. But my question is for Mr. Hawkins and Mr. Kunkel. In Polk County, Florida, which is a little south of my congressional district, we have a state-of-the-art coal gasification plant that has successfully produced electricity since 1996. This technology is well suited to carbon capture, and so as we look to coal gasification and other clean coal technologies as part of the climate solution, the question would be is what do you see as the best way to incentivize these technologies so that we can continue to have them available considering their efficiency?
Well, thank you, Congressman Stearns. Yes, the Polk County plant run by Tampa Electric is certainly one of the leaders in doing gasification in the United States, and one that has provided a great deal of operational experience. The first couple of years of that plant had some operational difficulties, but they have learned how to run that plant, to run it reliably. I think that their testimony today, if they were here, would be that it's the most reliable unit on their system and the one that is dispatched the most. It was built with some federal support. It doesn't capture its carbon, and if we want to create a structure that will allow plants to be built that actually capture their carbon, then we're going to need the kind of policy package which is in the Waxman-Markey discussion draft, a policy package that combines clear regulatory requirements, both for the storage of the CO2 and also for the performance of the new coal-fired power plants, and coupling it with financial incentives that are bankable financial incentives for the early deployment opportunities in this area. And it's very important that they be bankable, which means a different model than applying to the federal government for an award and hope that you win. The odds are better than the lottery, but they're not all that much more certain than the lottery. We need something that, if you want to go to Wall Street and get your project financed, you need something that's better than the lottery. And the structure that is in the Waxman-Markey bill, I would commend to your consideration, because what it says is that if you have a project which captures the CO2, you are entitled to get a payment of X dollars per ton captured. There's no government uncertainty there. There's no sort of, file your application and hope that you win the lottery. You have an expectation that you can go to Wall Street with, and that will help finance the project.
Why hasn't the folks in Polk County done this?
Well, we don't have the policy enacted yet, but with your help, maybe they will.
So you say you need the policy before you do it for the coal sequestration or capture, the carbon capture. You wouldn't do this on your own. You'd need the incentives.
That's exactly right. We operate in an electricity generating system where the marginal operating costs determine how much the plant gets run. And if you don't have the marginal operating costs covered for this additional cost of capturing the carbon, then you're not going to install that kind of capture. It will only happen if you get the economics right. And for the early projects, that means that you need a financial incentive payment.
Mr. Trysko, I'm just going to ask Mr. Kunkel, and then I'll ask you. That'd be good. Thank you. Dr. Kunkel?
Yes, I really agree with very much. And I would, when we, the types of project development we do are project financed projects. In other words, we'll sell the entire output of electricity for a 25 or 30-year project life right up front with our, some customer to whom we're selling this power. And then we'll operate that plant for them over the long term. These are large financings. Each of these projects we're working on are over $3 billion. So these are very large financings. And one of the things that's happening to us in looking at this future commodity market of carbon dioxide is that it'll be a highly volatile, potentially, commodity market. So if there are incentive systems that give us a stream, kind of a known stream of financial support for these new technologies, and early on in the program, when, if it's designed right, carbon prices should actually be pretty low, that if there's a known stream for that, then that's something I can take to my finance guys to put in their pro forma, and they can persuade investors and lenders that that's real. So those aspects are critical to really moving these projects forward.
Mr. Trysko, and
Yes, Congressman, thank you. And I've also had the pleasure of visiting the Polk County plant, and it is a marvel of technology. I was just going to point out that we have a precedent in Title IV of the Clean Air Act in the acid rain title that was added in 1990 for the provision of bonus allowances for utilities that employed scrubber technology early in Phase 1 rather than later in Phase 2. And that bonus allowance program was so popular that it was oversubscribed. It was known before the allowances were to be given out that there was more demand for them than supply. And the Utility Air Regulatory Group basically did a allocation of the available pool among its membership so that everybody had certainty as to the amount of allowances they would receive. And that pool, which was not nearly as large as the one that the United Mine Workers had advocated, was responsible for putting about 13 gigawatts of scrubbers on in Phase 1 rather than waiting until Phase 2.
Thank you, Mr. Briggs wants to answer, and then thank you, Mr. Chairman. Go ahead.
Very briefly, Congressman, I concur with the NRDC's comments and also add, it's one of the reasons why in the early phases of these projects that you're looking for all the value you can get from enhanced oil recovery to supplement the value of CO2 as a commodity value in the absence of incentives. And it's obviously dependent on states. One of the reasons why we're in California is you're looking at states who will go ahead of that policy mechanism and take the lead.
Great. You all say? Okay, great. Can I just ask Mr. Robo, what do you think is, by 2025, is the achievable goal for Florida under a national renewable electricity standard? Do you think Florida has a capacity for 25% of its electricity to come from renewables?
Chairman Markey, I'm very bullish solar PV economics, and we've seen just in the last year the cost of solar photovoltaic come down from July, from our first project to the ones that we're proposing right now, come down by 20%. And I think by the middle of this decade, we're going to see grid parity with solar PV in Florida. And so I think we have a real opportunity to have a big penetration of solar in Florida certainly by the middle of the next decade. We've been very
by
2050,
but by 2025, do you think 25% is possible?
I do think it's possible, depending on how quickly the technology comes down the cost curve. Yeah. But I've been
do you believe that?
Actually, I've been personally surprised at how quickly it's come down.
But is your gut now telling you that decline in the cost curve now is inexorable, and you can see how the economies of scale are kicking in?
Yes, Chairman.
Okay, thank you, sir. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Vermont, Mr. Welsh.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The discussion draft, witnesses, includes energy efficiency resource standard, as you know, requiring that the utilities achieve a certain level of electricity or natural gas savings. In many cases, energy efficiency measures more than pay for themselves by reducing electricity bills, not all. But I want to ask a couple of questions about that. I'll start with you, Ms. Greenwich. California has its own energy efficiency resource standard, so you've had some experience with this type of policy. Do you think that the energy efficiency resource standard in this discussion draft strengthens our prospects for success?
Absolutely. The energy efficiency performance standard is certainly among the top 3 items that need to go into place.
And I'd like you to elaborate on this, because the debate we're having here is the apprehension about whether the action we take creates jobs or causes jobs, reduces cost or increases cost. And we're deeply divided on that. And those states that have taken steps that we're proposing be taken nationally are in a special place, I think, to offer some practical experience.
Certainly. First of all, we in California, as in everywhere in the United States and just about everywhere in the world, we're in terrible, terrible economic times. I haven't heard one person say, and the reason why California is having all these problems is because you got ahead of the country on clean energy. I mean, the economic problems we are suffering from are not stemming from the fact that we have engaged in clean energy. In fact, a lot of the jobs that we still have, are because people are still pursuing energy efficiency and they're expanding, because people are looking at installing solar. And so the whole job conundrum, actually, I think in the little bit I've been listening yesterday and today, to me, is turned around, quite frankly. We should be looking at the jobs we've been able to grow. And here, just quickly, a study that came out from the University of Berkeley for the jobs that we have created in California over our, from 1972 to 2006 on our energy efficiency, is that we have created about 1.5 million full-time equivalent jobs with a total payroll of over $45 billion, driven by well-documented household energy savings of $56 billion. As a result of this, it was able to direct a greater percentage of its consumption to in-state employment-intensive goods and services, whose supply chains also largely reside within the state, creating a multiplier effect of job creation. And I want to take a moment to recognize Vermont. You've got a terrific energy efficiency program, and you know, you're doing the same thing too. You're keeping those jobs within the state and growing them, and that's what this is all about.
Congressman, could I add that the...
Well, I was going to ask you a different question. Yep. Mr. Reichert, good to see you.
Good to see you, Congressman.
Some folks are arguing that we should just include efficiency in the renewable electricity standard and skip the energy efficiency resource standard. And I'm asking your thoughts on that.
I think that what's proposed makes sense. Both standards, but with the carve out of around 20% within the renewable energy standard. I think that how those get integrated is not completely clear in the bill right now and needs some further fleshing out. But I think the two concepts, as multiple states have adopted renewable energy standards, as we know, multiple states have adopted energy efficiency resource standards. They're working well. I think it makes sense for the federal government to step up and do both. But as I say, make sure that there's integration across there. I just wanted to add one quick thing about energy efficiency. The hot new opportunity in the venture capital, the clean technology venture capital world right now is indeed energy efficiency. As we sit here in Washington, there's a whole conference out in California called the Energy Efficiency Finance Forum. This is bringing financial people to the table saying, all right, how can we bring even more capital to energy efficiency? Because that's the low-hanging fruit right now. And California, as the Commissioner said, has made great strides keeping energy use flat per capita for the last 20 years, while it's grown 50% in much of the rest of the country.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Robo, I mean, how do you see the renewable electricity standard? Bottom line, a job creator or a job killer?
We see it as a large job creator.
Thank you. I yield back. My time has expired. Thank you.
Your time has not expired if you don't want it to expire.
I'll yield back to the chairman.
Okay, great. Gentleman from Oregon is recognized for a second round.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to pick up on a couple of comments here. Ms. Greenwich, you talked about how we can create and grow jobs. And I want to get back on my soapbox here on biomass. I just can't resist because Harney County, Oregon's up to seasonally unadjusted 20% unemployment. Oregon's second to Michigan in unemployment overall. My district has 11 national forests. There's a lot of interest in biomass. But when you got a county that's 70 or 80% controlled by the federal government, and you got 20% unemployment, they don't get where Mr. Hawkins is coming from. And why, when you have a forest like this, may look good on a poster like that, but it's completely out of sync with nature in terms of being managed for old growth characteristics for ponderosa pine. That is a fire waiting to happen. That forest, exact same scene, has now been thinned,
They're good.
and that's how an old growth forest should be managed. The issue before us is after you've done this work and thinned it out to where the biologists and botanists and everybody else say it should be, why shouldn't you be able to take the waste material that came out of that thinning project and have it count toward biomass? in renewable energy. And this is the frustration we have. There was a biomass facility with green investors ready to go into Harney County who could not get a guaranteed supply of woody biomass to make their investors satisfied.
Yeah.
And yet the forest there at the rate they're treating will take 25 to 28 years at the current rate of treatment to get it in balance. So you see why they don't get where Mr. Hawkins' organization is at when it comes to saying nothing off this federal ground can you count as woody biomass for renewable energy consideration. Does California have that standard?
I honestly don't know. I'll be happy to look into it. It seems to me that the difficult issue here is the balancing, that we know forests are a way in which we are helping to reduce greenhouse gases because of...
If they're properly managed and don't go into fire.
And what we want to avoid doing is, on the one hand, having more forests cut down in order to then produce the biomass fuel to meet the renewable standard to satisfy the climate change, and then on the other hand to think about how are we going to continue to have sustainable forests. I am not a forestry expert, so where you draw the line between going into the forest or not,
and here's the deal. Here's the deal. This legislation is so poorly written on those areas. First of all, it directs the Departments of Interior and Agriculture to come up with adaptive management plans for the forest dealing with carbon and do so in 1 year. Each forest already has to come up with its own management plan, follow full NEPA, and that's just to do the planning process. Those often take 5 to 8 years to develop a 10-year plan. I am not making this stuff up.
That I'm aware of.
You understand this. So this legislation it says to every agency in all federal ground, you'll create a plan in 1 year and report back. That is just never going to happen. I mean, these timelines in this bill are embarrassingly poorly constructed, to be honest with you. But then I go to, like page 368, and it talks about electricity sources, and it excludes renewable biomass from, I guess, the base load. And I don't know if any, have you all, by the way, read the full text of the bill? I've asked every panel this, yes or no. Have you read the whole bill, Dr. App? You read?
I read the parts a non-lawyer can understand.
Oh, I stayed in the Holiday Inn, but I'm not even a lawyer. Mr. Carr?
Not all parts, no, sir.
Mr. Briggs?
Not all parts, no.
Mr. Trisco?
Not all parts, sir.
Sure. Mr. Hawkins?
I've got mine already tabbed and indexed.
So you've read the whole bill?
I've skimmed the whole thing, and some pages faster than others.
I understand. I'm struggling too. Dr. Kunkel?
Not all parts.
Mr. Robo?
Not all parts.
Just about the whole thing, but I got to confess, I think I skipped over the biomass definition.
I'll go back to that. Mr. Riker?
648 pages. I've looked at every page.
Yes, sir.
Absolutely not.
Perfect. All right. I got it. Well, see, I'm trying, and I'm not, as I say, I wore out one pair of reading glasses. I've got another in my desk. But I'm trying to figure out, even on page 368, when it talks about compliance obligations and then talks about electricity sources, it excludes renewable biomass as an electricity source. Now, renewable biomass is already defined early on to be to exclude off federal lands and all this. So can somebody tell me why renewable biomass would be excluded in the in this electricity source?
I can answer that one. It's because if you make electricity from renewable biomass, you don't have to turn in an allowance. This is the compliance obligations section of the bill, and this is a benefit for renewable biomass.
Okay, good. But now we know that if you make it from woody biomass off federal ground, which is occurring in my district now where they're heating, they replaced an oil-burning stove in a high school in Enterprise using hog fuel, wood chips. They're saving, it's enormous amount of fuel. Replacing it with wood, very few emissions, a lot less than that. It doesn't qualify. How does that make sense?
Well, you know, what I would say, these hearings are educational experiences for the witnesses sometime too, and you've obviously thought a lot about this issue, Congressman, and I'm not the organizational expert on the biomass issues, but if you have the time, we'd very much like to come in and visit with you on that.
I'd be happy to do that. My door's always open, because the hospital in Harney County, where this biomass facility, they switched to wood pellet burning stove, and they cut their fuel costs by 2/3. And DEQ, our Department of Environmental Quality, at least the hospital folks told me, said it has virtually no emissions. And they take out a garbage can size, regular garbage of ash every 2 to 3 months. And it's from wood chips. And Sweden, 18% of their renewable energy now is from woody biomass. You've said from AEI, or the Energy Information, this is where we're going. We got the federal land, 47% of the Forest Service budget spent fighting catastrophic fire. You know that in California. We know that in Oregon. And my time is way over, and you've been most generous, sir.
No, thank you. I'm learning a lot too. It is an interesting subject. Does the gentleman from Vermont wish to be recognized again?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to talk a little bit about carbon capture and sequestration and address my questions to Mr. Hawkins. Mr. Hawkins, I just wish you, if you would, elaborate on why U.S. CAP members believe that we need a set of complementary policies in place for carbon capture and sequestration, and more broadly, of course, for coal, and what would happen if we don't have a comprehensive approach.
Yes, a cap and trade program by itself in the early years, especially one that has a substantial number of offsets and cost containment provisions, is likely to have a fairly modest economic signal. And as Dr. Kunkel and others have testified, these early projects, whether it's for carbon capture or some advanced forms of renewables, these early projects are likely to have incremental costs that are higher than the carbon clearing price in the early years of these programs. So if you rely solely on the market signal from the cap as the only device, you're likely to get a bunch of decisions which look optimal from the standpoint of the individual investor, but in fact are suboptimal from the standpoint of where society needs to head. We've got this is a marathon. Controlling carbon is a marathon, and if you run it like a sprint, which is what tends to happen when you have these short-term economic signals and a high discount rate, you're not going to finish the race. So, you know, we tend to think that having a multiple set of strategies which are enabled by the bill and incented by the bill is very powerful. I say that a bicycle is more stable than a pogo stick, a tricycle is more stable than a bicycle, and a wide stance four-wheel vehicle is more stable than all of them. And we have a bunch of platforms here that can be used to drive home CO2 reductions. And so my variant on Dr. Apt's point is, yes, the focus needs to be on CO2. But sometimes it's good to have a turtle strategy, have a lot of eggs on the beach, because you're not entirely sure right now what's going to be the one that's going to get you to victory, and you probably need more than one. And having a strategy that gets all of these in the game so that you have as many things to pick from, we think is the right way to do it.
So just describe what will happen with the deployment of new coal-based power plants if these provisions are adopted. And one of the concerns folks have been, things we need to do, one of the concerns folks have expressed is this dash for gas, and what the displacement would occur and how that would affect the price in a very disruptive way. If you'd comment on that.
Yes, we discussed this at great length in the U.S. CAP group, and everyone was concerned about the dash to gas being something to be avoided, and that's why there's a package that says there's an emission performance standard for new coal, and there is a financial incentive, the stream of payments for carbon capture. And our view is that that payment stream ought to be sized at a level where an investor that's looking at a fossil investment plant says, you know, this is a better business proposition to build a coal plant that captures its carbon, and we get that financial incentive, than it is to build a natural gas plant that vents its carbon, and we get no financial incentive.
Okay. And there's been a lot of concern raised about the timing for deployment of the carbon capture and storage technology, saying that commercial deployment is not expected until 2025. But those estimates assume there's no cost to emitting global warming pollution, no requirement to use carbon capture and storage technology, and no significant financial support for the technology. What do these estimates tell you about the timing for deployment of CCS technology if this legislation in its draft form or close to it is adopted?
Well, what we do is pay attention to witnesses like Dr. Kunkel from Tenaska and Hydrogen Energy. And Dr. Kunkel has testified that they could break ground next year on their project if they have the right policy support, and that could be up and running as fast as any coal plant that breaks ground next year. Our view is that this can happen very quickly. There are a bunch of commercial operators that are ready to go as soon as the policy signals get straightened out.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Tresco?
Trisco.
Trisco, thank you.
Congressman Gene Trisco for the United Mine Workers. If I could elaborate on David's point. First, from a practical standpoint, if you were talking about having a plant, an operating advanced coal plant equipped with carbon capture and storage that was online and producing electricity in the year 2020, that plant, in effect, would need to be in the permitting stage today. Leaving aside all of the issues concerning the incentives, the financial incentives in the bill and the like, to get a plant online by 2020, the plant needs to be in permitting today. We do not have, at this point, beyond the number of plants such as the AEP, the Duke plant, the Tenaska facilities, we do not have any assurance of significant penetration at a commercial scale by the year 2020 beyond the kind of 3 gigawatt level that is proposed in the Boucher bill. And the Boucher bill is designed to handle the demand, if you will, for commercial scale demonstration facilities between now and 2020. It's after the year 2020 when we would anticipate that the second suite of financial incentives, those that are to be defined by what is now the open-ended Section 115 that David has spoken about, those plants would come online after the year 2020. And the indications are that there would be significant demand for them going out to 2030 and 2040.
Dr. Kunkel, do you agree with the 2020 timeline assessment?
Well, not for us. And of course, we are in permitting, and our project in Illinois has received a permit and so on. And of course, it does take time to develop these projects. One of the things I would point out is that in the post-combustion capture technologies that we're looking at, as opposed to IGCC, that the period of time required to build that piece on the back of an existing power plant as a retrofit might be something like 2.5 years of construction time. I mean, these things all take significant amounts of time, but it's less than the full construction cycle of a power plant. So if we could demonstrate that technology at commercial scale, let's say at Trailblazer, by 2015, and run it for a year and convince people this really works, then you know the designs and so on could be perfected, and a new generation could be online and operating as retrofits, you know, within a couple of years after that point. So maybe that gets you around the 2020 timeframe, you know, for that. I'd maybe let Hydrogen Energy talk more about the IGCC opportunity.
Okay, I'll yield back to the chairman.
Thank you.
It's up to
Gentleman's
you.
time has expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really came down here just to ask you to give this panel a meal voucher since they'd been here all day and probably didn't eat much lunch or whatever. But as long as I'm here, I thought I would ask one question. I want to ask Dr. Apt, I believe. First, thank you for your service to the country as an astronaut and all that you've done. But I'm told that you testified that you think a performance-based standard based on the Clean Air Act model is much better to use in terms of some very complex cap and trade scheme. I just got a synopsis of Congressman Boucher's letter to Congressman Waxman that's single-spaced 4 pages of changes to the proposed cap and trade legislation. And that's just a summary of the changes. So the Republican alternative that is yet to be unveiled, we're waiting to see the allocation scheme in the main bill, but we are going to have a Republican alternative. We use a performance-based standard for coal based on the best available clean coal technology, and then put some incentives in terms of beating that standard of accelerated depreciation, so that we could encourage new technology, but at the same time allow coal to be used as a fuel source for electricity. Could you comment on that?
Sure, thanks very much. In my view, best available technology has frozen technology in a lot of areas. I would encourage you to look rather at a emissions standard that lowers with time. As you know, the California standard is 1,100 pounds per megawatt hour. That has the effect of saying, okay, we'll freeze things at natural gas or better, and that's okay if you just take a snapshot in time, but it would be better if it declined in time, so that you know you've got to take 80% of the CO2 out of the electric power industry by, let's say, 2040, 2050. So that if you had something like that that declined, then Mr. Briggs' plant that emits 400 pounds per megawatt hour looks pretty good. On the other hand, if you think it's going to freeze at 1,100, it doesn't look so good. So that's a modification that I'd hope you would consider.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
That's it. Great.
Yes, sir.
Does the gentleman from Vermont have any other questions? Okay. Well, let's do this then. With my apologies to the ranking member, I was going to give each one of these witnesses 1 minute to tell us what they want to remember, but given the size of the panel, that's double the time which any member would have to question a witness. But with unanimous consent, I will make that motion that we give each one of you a 1 minute opportunity to tell us what it is that you want the committee to retain as we go through the drafting and ultimate markup of this legislation. We'll go in reverse order of the original panel, and we will start with you, Dr. Apt.
Well, since I got to get back to Pittsburgh tonight, I'll be short. 2 things. Focus on CO2. Renewables and low carbon aren't synonyms. And 2, allow efficiencies all through the system, generation and transmission, as well as on the customer side of the meter to count.
Great, thank you. Mr. Kerr.
I think I would adopt those 2 points, and I would also say that focus on what you're trying to do, and not put inconsistent or contradictory pieces of policy together in a way that will operate to make things less efficient, more expensive to ratepayers. And also, there aren't just jobs following renewables. There are jobs that are developed by CCS and nuclear and other non-carbon emitting technologies, and a job is a job. They don't distinguish between renewable jobs or CCS or other sorts of jobs.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Briggs.
Well, first of all, very pleased that CCS seems to be a given as part of the mix. I would also say there is a distinction, we haven't really touched on it too much, between our technology and Tenaska's technology, pre and post. It doesn't really matter. CCS is available today. But I think the right incentive mechanism is important, as we've covered, I think, and then one regulator to cover the actual policy framework around it is also vital.
Okay. Mr. Triscoe.
ensure that the targets and timetables that are adopted in the bill, particularly in the short term, are consistent with the expected widespread availability of CCS technology, so as to avoid the result, for example, evident in EPA's analysis, preliminary analysis of the bill, that suggests that generation from fossil-based electricity would decline from 4.3 terawatt hours in the year 2050 to 1.3 terawatt hours in the year 2050 under scenario 3. That to us is an unacceptable outcome.
Thank you. Mr. Hawkins.
First, I'd say avoid focusing on technologies, but keep in mind the facts on the ground that need to change to cut carbon emissions. And I feel quite confident in predicting that regardless of technology pathways, 50 years from now, we're going to have electricity, we're going to have vehicles, we're going to have fuels, and we're going to have buildings. And we need strategies that are going to drive decarbonization in each one of those areas. And you've got a lot of policies in the bill that are aimed at doing just that. And there can be good and useful debate about how to focus on harmonizing those so they integrate well. But those are the four big linemen that we have to think about: electricity, vehicles, fuels, and buildings.
Thank you. Dr. Kunkel.
One of the most relevant things we can do as Americans on this larger problem is to tackle the problem that the Chinese and Indians will have, which is CCS, basically. They're building a lot of coal-fired power plants, new ones, pretty good ones, I bet, and improving ones, but they don't have this technology. If we can find cost-effective ways to employ it, if we can develop that, then that will be a huge contribution.
Thank you. Mr. Robo.
Enacting a renewable electricity standard is really critical for the U.S. to continue to drive its success in the clean energy economy and to retain its competitiveness globally. Clean tech is the way of the future, and we need to be competitive as a nation in that industry.
Thank you. Mr. Greenwich.
4 points. One, the bill, you got it right. Let's get it passed. Two is we do need the renewable portfolio standard. We can't just say let's have carbon standards. To do transmission, you need to plan for something, and we're just not going to be able to get the transmission we need unless we have that renewable standard set out there. Three, states are your partners. In all of this legislation, think about how you can be really utilizing the states, helping the states, working together. And four is I have two 15-year-olds, and they thank you. I don't want to go home without being able to say, you know, we've been working hard at the state level. We need the federal level to step up, and my children need that. Thank you.
Mr. Riker.
Mr. Chairman, there are a broad array of ways that we can get at this climate crisis that we're facing, and there are smart ways from both an environmental and an economic perspective. Energy efficiency is indeed the low-hanging fruit. We ought to go out and pick it. It does grow back because of the improvements in technologies. Renewable energy is coming on strong. There's a huge array of opportunities. The resource base is vast in this country. We do need to crack the code on transmission, or a lot of what we need to get done isn't going to happen. I think the subcommittee's bill is headed in exactly the right direction. Please do look at this issue of making sure there's adequate capital. And I do commend the work that Congressman Inslee and also Senators Bingaman and Murkowski are doing on that front. And lastly, let's take a look at this geothermal stuff. It's the sleeping giant. Whether it's Texas or it's Alaska or it's Florida, there's a lot there. The oil and gas industry is interested in it. Let's do a hearing and explore it.
Okay, good. Thank you. And Dr. Grunsbeck. Can you turn on the microphone, please?
Mr. Chairman, beyond endorsing Mr. Riker's surprise endorsement of my agency, I'd say that EIA looks forward to providing the committee, both sides of the committee, with data and analyses to support your policy deliberations. EIA's first administrator, Lincoln Moses, great name, once said that there are no facts about the future. However, I think policymakers can definitely benefit from considering how transparent and objective, if not always prescient, projections are affected by the different policies that they have under consideration. So I'm from the federal government, the executive branch, and I'm here to help you.
Okay, thank you, Doctor. And we'll leave you out of this final quick question. Do you think we'll ask each one of you yes or no, do you think we can construct a cap-and-trade system that can work and can be done consistent with the long-term economic goals of our country? Mr. Riker.
We can and we must.
Ms. Greenwich.
Ditto.
Mr. Robo.
Absolutely.
Dr. Kunkel.
I think we can. I think the guy in the street needs to see the benefit to him, and he doesn't quite see it yet.
Mr. Hawkins.
Absolutely. This is the most important work that you will do in your career.
Thank you. Mr. Driscoll.
Absolutely, and the devil will always remain in the details.
Oh, God. One or the other.
Absolutely.
Absolutely, but timing technology and the avoidance of severe economic disruptions in the early years are key to gaining the public support for the long-term success.
Thank you. Dr. Abt.
Yeah, I think you can, but I worry that you will labor mightily and give forth with a cap and trade that will produce a carbon price that's too low to affect physical change. And that really worries me.
Okay, thank you. And by the way, Dr. Abt, you were born in Springfield, Massachusetts, and an astronaut. Congratulations, and we're proud of you. Thank you. This is just a fantastic panel. Thank you all so much for your great contributions to this discussion. Thank you.
You flying yourself?
Yeah.
They sent me the jet.
Good to see you
Nice
again.
to see you. Didn't meet
Nice to
you.
meet you, yeah.
Good to see you.
See you.